Imagine this: you're 6 months pregnant, beaming with joy from your ultrasound appointment, only to accidentally discover photos on your husband's phone, him in passionate embraces with your best friend, wearing the anniversary bracelet he claimed was lost. Your world shatters, triggering premature labor and a desperate fight for your baby's life. But that's just the beginning. What follows is a twisted web of fake pregnancies, stolen millions, FBI raids, courtroom betrayals, and a nuclear revenge that will leave you breathless. Will Sarah uncover the deadly secrets and reclaim her family? Or will the manipulations destroy her forever? Stick around. This story has twists you won't see coming, and you won't want to miss a single moment. If you're hooked already, smash that like button, drop a comment with what you do in Sarah's shoes, share this epic tale with a friend who loves drama, and hit subscribe for more mind-blowing stories like this. Sarah Matthews sat in her luxury BMW outside the fertility clinic, rain cascading down her windshield like the tears streaming down her face. In her trembling hands, she held two ultrasound photos of her unborn son, the images now spotted with teardrops that made the black and white pictures blur together. 20 minutes ago, she had been the happiest woman alive. Now, her world had crumbled faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The rain pounded against her car windows with increasing intensity, each drop echoing the devastating revelation that had just shattered her 15-year marriage. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing, but the image kept replaying in her mind like a cruel movie she couldn't turn off. It had started as such a perfect day. At 38 and 6 months pregnant with their second child, Sarah had been glowing with that special radiance that only expectant mothers possess. She had chosen her favorite maternity dress, the soft blue one that David always said brought out her eyes, and had even taken extra time with her makeup. This ultrasound appointment was special because they would finally learn if their baby was healthy after some concerning tests the week before. Dr. Martinez had delivered the wonderful news with a warm smile. Their son was developing perfectly, all organs functioning normally, no signs of the genetic abnormalities they had been worried about. Sarah had felt such overwhelming relief and joy that she had immediately reached for her phone to share the good news with David, who was stuck in back-to-back meetings at his tech company. That's when everything went wrong. Instead of opening her own camera app to take a photo of the ultrasound images, Sarah had accidentally tapped on David's iCloud photos. As a devoted wife who handled all their personal affairs, she had access to his accounts for managing their shared life. What she saw made her blood run cold. Photo after photo of her husband David with Jessica Crane, her former maid of honor and supposed best friend. Images that no married man should ever be taking with another woman. Jessica, laughing in David's arms at what looked like an expensive restaurant. Jessica, wearing a negligee that Sarah recognized from a Victoria's Secret catalog, posing in what was clearly a hotel room. David and Jessica kissing passionately against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. But the image that broke Sarah's heart completely was the most recent one, dated just 3 days ago. Jessica was wearing the diamond bracelet that David had claimed he lost during a business trip to Chicago. The same bracelet he had bought for their 10th wedding anniversary, inscribed with the words, "Forever yours, Sarah." Sarah's hands had started shaking so violently that she nearly dropped the phone. The ultrasound technician had asked if she was feeling all right, concerned by Sarah's sudden pallor and obvious distress. Sarah had mumbled something about pregnancy hormones and low blood sugar, gathered her things, and fled the clinic as quickly as her pregnant body would allow. Now, sitting in her car in the parking lot, Sarah felt like she was drowning. The affair with Jessica wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage vows. Jessica had been Sarah's closest friend since college. She was Emma's godmother. She had held Sarah's hand during her first pregnancy when David was traveling for business. She had helped plan their recent anniversary party, standing beside Sarah in the kitchen, laughing about old times while they arranged flowers, and talked about how lucky Sarah was to have such a devoted husband. "How could I have been so blind?" Sarah whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain. She thought back to all the signs she had missed or rationalized away. David's increased travel schedule, his new interest in working out and buying expensive clothes, the way he guarded his phone like a state secret, Jessica's frequent questions about David's schedule and preferences. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jessica. "How did the appointment go? Is everything okay with the baby? David mentioned you were worried. Call me when you get home. Love you." The casual cruelty of it made Sarah's stomach turn. Love you. How dare she sign off with those words after what she had done? Sarah's pregnancy hormones, already heightened by the stress, made her nausea overwhelm her. She barely had time to open the car door before she was violently sick in the parking lot. As she sat back in her car, wiping her mouth with tissues from her purse, Sarah's mind raced with questions and realizations. How long had this been going on? Was Jessica the first affair? Or were there others? Did their mutual friends know? Was Emma aware that something was wrong between her parents? The rain continued to pour, and Sarah found herself thinking about her favorite TV show, The Good Wife. She had always admired Alicia Florrick's strength and grace under pressure, but now Sarah realized that television drama was nothing compared to the raw, devastating reality of betrayal. In the show, there were commercial breaks and dramatic music to help process the emotions. In real life, there was just the sound of rain and the feeling that her heart had been ripped from her chest. Sarah looked down at her swollen belly, where her son was growing completely unaware of the chaos erupting in his world. She placed both hands protectively over her bump and made a silent promise to her unborn child. "Whatever happens next, I will protect you and your sister. Mommy's gonna figure this out." She was just reaching for her phone to call her sister Rebecca, the only person she trusted completely, when a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. At first, she thought it was just stress, but when a second, more intense contraction followed, Sarah's medical knowledge from her first pregnancy kicked in. This wasn't normal Braxton Hicks contractions. This was something much more serious. "No, no, no!" Sarah gasped as another wave of pain hit her. She was only 24 weeks pregnant. Her baby couldn't survive outside the womb at this stage. The stress of discovering David's affair was triggering premature labor. With shaking fingers, Sarah dialed 911. "Please, I need an ambulance at the Women's Health Center on Medical Drive. I'm 24 weeks pregnant, and I think I'm in labor. Please hurry." As she waited for the ambulance, Sarah tried to call David. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His cheerful, recorded voice felt like a knife in her heart. "Hi, you've reached David Matthews. I'm probably in a meeting making magic happen for our clients. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." "David, it's me," Sarah said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "I'm at the doctor's office and something's wrong with the baby. I'm having contractions. I need you to meet me at the hospital right away. Please, just drop everything and come." Through her pain and fear, Sarah heard the ambulance sirens getting closer. But as she looked across the parking lot, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Jessica's red BMW was pulling into the same medical plaza, probably arriving for her own appointment at the dermatology clinic in the same building. As the paramedics helped Sarah onto the stretcher, the last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Jessica stepping out of her car, looking perfectly put together in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Jessica glanced toward the ambulance with mild curiosity, having no idea that inside was the friend whose life she had just destroyed. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah, on what should have been one of the happiest days of her pregnancy. Learning that her son was healthy and developing normally, she was instead being rushed to the hospital in premature labor, triggered by the devastating discovery of her husband's affair with her best friend. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle sped toward the hospital, Sarah could only think about how quickly a perfect life could fall apart. This morning she had been a secure, loved wife and mother-to-be. Now she was a betrayed woman fighting to save her baby's life, wondering if anything in her marriage had ever been real. The paramedic squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Just breathe, Mama. We're going to take good care of you and your baby." But Sarah knew that no matter what happened at the hospital, nothing would ever be good again. Her trust had been shattered. Her marriage was built on lies, and her unborn son's life hung in the balance. The perfect storm of betrayal and medical crisis was just the beginning of what would become the fight of her life. Sarah's eyes fluttered open to the harsh fluorescent lighting of the intensive care unit. The steady beep of monitors provided a rhythmic soundtrack to her confusion as she tried to remember where she was and why her body felt like it had been hit by a truck. The events of the previous day came flooding back in waves of devastation and fear. "Sarah, oh, thank God, you're awake." David's voice came from beside her bed, heavy with what sounded like genuine relief and exhaustion. He was slumped in the uncomfortable hospital chair, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping in it. "The baby," Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, her throat dry from the medications they had given her during the emergency delivery. "He's alive," David said quickly, reaching for her hand. "He's in the NICU, born at 24 weeks and 2 days, weighing 1 pound, 13 ounces. The doctors say he's a fighter, just like his mom." Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Her son had survived the premature birth triggered by the shock of discovering David's affair, but even through her maternal relief, she couldn't forget what she had seen on his phone. The images of him with Jessica were burned into her memory. "I tried to call you," Sarah said carefully, studying David's face for any sign of guilt or deception. "When the contractions started, I called you, but it went to voicemail." David's expression darkened with what appeared to be genuine regret. "I was in the meeting from hell with our biggest investor. Jerry Chen flew in from Singapore, and we were locked in the conference room for 6 hours straight. No phones, no interruptions. I didn't even see your message until after the meeting ended. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have been there." His explanation sounded reasonable, and the exhaustion in his eyes seemed authentic. For a moment, Sarah wondered if she had imagined the photos on his phone. Pregnancy hormones could cause hallucinations, couldn't they? Maybe her insecurities about her changing body and David's increased work travel had made her see things that weren't really there. "The doctors said you went into labor due to extreme stress," David continued, his voice full of concern. "What happened at the appointment, doctor?" "Martinez said the baby's test came back perfect. So what could have upset you so much?" Sarah stared at her husband, this man she had loved for 15 years, trying to read his face. Either he was completely innocent and she was losing her mind, or he was an accomplished liar who could fake genuine emotion. The uncertainty was almost worse than the betrayal itself. "I don't know," Sarah said finally. "Maybe it was just accumulated anxiety about the test results. I've been so worried about the baby's health." David nodded sympathetically. "The stress of this pregnancy has been harder on you than the first one. I've noticed you've seemed more anxious, more emotional. Maybe we should look into getting you some help, some counseling to deal with the prenatal anxiety." Something about the way he said it made Sarah's skin crawl. Was he already laying the groundwork to make her look unstable? Or was he genuinely concerned about her mental health? The line between paranoia and intuition was becoming increasingly blurred. "I brought you these," David said, producing a massive bouquet of white peonies, Sarah's favorite flowers. "I know they can't make up for me not being here when you needed me, but I wanted you to know that you and our children are the most important things in my world." The gesture was so typical of David, grand and expensive, and perfectly calculated to her preferences. Before discovering the photos, Sarah would have been touched by his thoughtfulness. Now she wondered if the flowers were meant to distract her from asking too many questions about where he had been and what he had been doing. A nurse entered the room with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Matthews, good to see you awake. I'm Linda, and I'll be taking care of you today. Your son is doing remarkably well for a 24-weeker. The neonatologist will be in to talk with you about his condition and the road ahead." "Can I see him?" Sarah asked, struggling to sit up. "Of course. Let me get you a wheelchair and we'll take you to the NICU." As Linda helped Sarah into the wheelchair, David walked beside them, his hand resting protectively on Sarah's shoulder. To any observer, they looked like a devoted couple facing a medical crisis together, united in their love for their premature son. The NICU was a jarring maze of high-tech equipment and tiny babies fighting for their lives. Sarah's son looked impossibly small in his incubator, connected to multiple machines by a web of tubes and wires. Despite his fragile appearance, his little chest rose and fell steadily, and his miniature fingers were perfectly formed. "He's beautiful," Sarah whispered, placing her hand on the warm plastic of the incubator. "Just like his mother," David said softly, and for a moment, Sarah almost believed that everything between them was still perfect. Their intimate moment was interrupted by the arrival of an elaborate floral arrangement that dwarfed even David's expensive peonies. The delivery person wheeled in a display that looked more appropriate for a funeral than a hospital room. "Who are those from?" Sarah asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. David checked the card with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Jessica," she wrote, "thinking of you and your beautiful family during this difficult time. All my love. Jess." Sarah watched David's face carefully as he read the card. If he was having an affair with Jessica, wouldn't he have coordinated with her about the flowers? Wouldn't there be some secret signal or inside joke that only the two of them would understand? His reaction seemed completely normal, just a husband reading a thoughtful message from their family friend. "That's so sweet of her," Sarah managed to say. "I should call and thank her." "She actually stopped by earlier while you were sleeping," David said. "She was worried sick about you. I told her you were stable but exhausted, and she said she'd come back later when you were feeling stronger." The mention of Jessica's visit made Sarah's stomach clench. Had Jessica really been worried? Or had she come to the hospital to assess the situation? Was she concerned about Sarah as a friend? Or was she checking to see if her affair with David had been discovered over the next few hours? Sarah found herself analyzing every interaction, every comment, every gesture from David. When he brought her favorite chai latte from the expensive coffee shop across town, was it a loving gesture or guilt-driven overcompensation? When he fell asleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair instead of going home to their comfortable bed, was it devotion or was he avoiding phone calls from his mistress? The mental exhaustion of constant suspicion was almost worse than the physical recovery from her emergency delivery. Sarah felt like she was going crazy, second-guessing every instinct and every observation. The sleep deprivation and hormonal changes from her premature delivery weren't helping her mental clarity. It was during one of David's coffee runs that Sarah decided to do some investigating. Using the excuse of checking their insurance coverage for the NICU expenses, she opened his laptop while he was gone. Their baby's medical bills were already approaching $50,000, and they would likely reach several $100,000 before he was healthy enough to come home. What Sarah found in David's financial records made her blood run cold. $2 million had been transferred from their joint investment account to an offshore holding company called JC Holdings. The transfers had happened over the past 6 months, always in amounts just under the federal reporting requirements that would trigger automatic bank notifications. JC, Jessica Crane. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the transaction records. David hadn't just been having an affair. He had been systematically moving their marital assets to accounts controlled by his mistress. Money that was supposed to secure their children's futures, pay for college tuition, and fund their retirement was being funneled to the woman who was sleeping with her husband. The sound of David's footsteps in the hallway made Sarah quickly close the laptop and pretend to be reading a parenting magazine. When he returned with her chai latte and a concerned smile, she forced herself to act normal, even though her heart was pounding with rage and betrayal. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" David asked, settling back into his chair. "You look a little flushed. Should I call the nurse?" "I'm fine," Sarah managed to say. "Just tired." "I've been thinking," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "With everything that's happened, with the stress of the pregnancy and now the baby being in the NICU, maybe we should talk to someone, a counselor or therapist who can help us navigate this difficult time as a family." Sarah nodded, though she wondered if David's sudden interest in therapy was motivated by genuine concern or by a desire to have her labeled as mentally unstable. She had read enough about contentious divorces to know that husbands sometimes use their wives' emotional struggles against them in custody battles. David pulled out a small jewelry box and placed it on her lap. I also wanted to give you this. I know it can't make up for me not being there when you went into labor, but I want you to know how much I love you and appreciate everything you sacrificed for our family. Inside the box was a stunning diamond necklace, easily worth $50,000, the same amount they would owe the hospital for just the first week of their son's NICU stay. Sarah stared at the glittering diamonds and felt sick. Had David bought this necklace with money that was supposed to pay their son's medical bills? Or worse, had he used money that he had already earmarked for his secret life with Jessica? It's beautiful, Sarah said, because she didn't know what else to say. I had it inscribed, David said proudly, lifting the pendant to show her the back. Forever and always. David. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but not from happiness. The inscription was almost identical to the one on the bracelet that Jessica was now wearing. The bracelet that David had claimed was lost. Either he was incredibly unimaginative when it came to romantic gestures, or he was giving the same gifts to both the women in his life. As David fastened the necklace around her neck, Sarah caught a glimpse of something in his jacket pocket. It looked like a hotel key card. When he bent down to kiss her forehead, she could smell an unfamiliar perfume on his clothes, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't her signature scent. The final piece of evidence came when David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it quickly and then put the phone face down on the table, but not before Sarah caught a glimpse of the sender's name. Jess. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process everything she had discovered. The photos on his iCloud account, the $2 million transferred to JC Holdings, the hotel keycard in his pocket, the unfamiliar perfume on his clothes, the identical jewelry inscriptions, the secret text messages from Jessica. Either she was the most paranoid, hormonally imbalanced woman in the world, or her husband was having an affair with her best friend while their premature son fought for his life in the NICU. The evidence was overwhelming, but David's behavior seemed so genuinely caring and devoted that Sarah began to doubt her own sanity. As if summoned by her thoughts, Jessica appeared in the doorway of the NICU family room. She looked absolutely stunning, as always, wearing a designer outfit that showed off her perfect figure and flawless skin. Her timing was impeccable, arriving just as David was stepping away to speak with the neonatologist. Sarah, honey, how are you holding up? Jessica rushed to her side with what appeared to be genuine concern. I've been so worried about you and the baby. As Jessica hugged her, Sarah noticed that she was wearing a new Cartier bracelet that looked identical to the one David had given Sarah for their anniversary, the one he claimed to have lost, the bracelet that Sarah had seen Jessica wearing in the photos on David's phone. Thank you for the beautiful flowers, Sarah said, watching Jessica's face carefully. Of course. I just wish there was more I could do. This must be so terrifying for you. Jessica's eyes seemed to mist with tears. I can't imagine going through something like this. Either Jessica was genuinely concerned about Sarah's well-being, or she was an Academy Award-worthy actress. Sarah found herself more confused than ever about what was real and what was paranoia-fueled imagination. As Jessica sat beside her, chattering about work and mutual friends, Sarah made a decision. She needed concrete proof of what was happening, one way or another. Her mental health and her family's future depended on knowing the truth. When David returned from his conversation with the doctor, he seemed surprised to see Jessica, but greeted her warmly. Jess, thank you so much for coming, and for the incredible flowers. I just want to help however I can, Jessica replied, placing a supportive hand on David's arm. You two are like family to me. Sarah watched the interaction between her husband and her best friend, looking for any sign of inappropriate intimacy or secret communication. But their behavior seemed completely normal, just two friends supporting each other during a family crisis. Later that evening, after Jessica had left and David had gone to get dinner from the cafeteria, Sarah made her decision. She was going to follow David the next time he left the hospital. She was going to get proof, one way or another, of what was really happening in her marriage. As she sat beside her son's incubator, watching his tiny chest rise and fall with the help of the ventilator, Sarah whispered a promise to him. "Mommy's going to find out the truth. Baby boy, whatever it takes, I'm going to protect you and make sure you have the life you deserve." But even as she made the promise, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her world was about to get much worse before it got better. The hotel key card in David's pocket felt like a smoking gun, and she had a terrible suspicion that she knew exactly which hotel it belonged to and what she would find when she got there. Sarah's hands trembled as she inserted the key card into the electronic lock of room 2849 at the Ritz-Carlton. Using her remaining hotel loyalty points from their anniversary trip last year, she had managed to book the room directly across the hall from 2847, the room number she had memorized from the key card that had fallen from David's jacket pocket the night before. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly the time when David had told her he would be in meetings all afternoon and unable to visit the NICU. Their premature son was stable but still critical, and Sarah had told the nurses she needed to go home for a shower and some rest. Instead, she was here, 6 months pregnant and exhausted, playing detective in one of the city's most expensive hotels. The elegant hallway was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner. Sarah positioned herself at the peephole of room 2849, her heart pounding so hard she was afraid it might trigger another medical emergency. She didn't know what she expected to see, but she had to know the truth about her marriage, even if it destroyed her. At 2:15, she heard the distinctive ding of the elevator. Through her peephole, Sarah watched David emerge, looking handsome and confident in his tailored navy suit. He was carrying a bottle of champagne and what appeared to be shopping bags from expensive boutiques. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the distinctive Tiffany blue bag among his purchases. David moved with the familiarity of someone who had made this journey many times before. He didn't hesitate or check room numbers. He walked directly to room 2847 and used his key card with practiced ease. The lock clicked open, and David disappeared inside. Sarah waited, barely breathing. Her eyes pressed to the peephole so hard it was leaving an indentation around her eye socket. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She was beginning to wonder if David was alone in the room, meeting a business associate in an unconventional location, when the elevator dinged again. Jessica stepped out wearing a stunning red dress that hugged her perfect figure like it had been custom-made for her. Her dark hair fell in glossy waves over her shoulders, and her makeup was flawless, despite the fact that it was the middle of a workday. She carried an expensive handbag and moved with the confidence of a woman who belonged in luxury settings. But what made Sarah's blood turn to ice was Jessica's obviously pregnant belly. Jessica was wearing what was clearly a fake pregnancy padding under her dress, creating the illusion that she was about 6 months pregnant, exactly the same stage as Sarah. The padding was expertly done, professional quality, the kind used in theater productions or movies. Jessica had even adopted the slightly altered walk of a pregnant woman, one hand resting protectively on her fake bump. Sarah watched in horror as Jessica knocked softly on the door of room 2847. David opened it immediately, as if he had been waiting for her. The smile on his face when he saw Jessica was radiant, the same expression he used to give Sarah when they were newlyweds. David pulled Jessica into his arms and kissed her with a passion that Sarah hadn't seen directed at her in years. "I missed you," David murmured, loud enough for Sarah to hear through the thin hotel walls. "I can barely concentrate in meetings, knowing I get to see you later." "I missed you too," Jessica replied, her voice taking on a breathier quality that Sarah had never heard before. "How is she doing? Is she still suspicious?" "Sarah, no. She's completely focused on the baby. The premature birth really shook her up, and the doctor has her on medications that are making her pretty foggy. I think the stress is getting to her mentally. She keeps asking strange questions and seems paranoid about everything." Sarah's heart shattered as she listened to her husband discuss her mental state with his mistress. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Here she was, fighting to save their premature son's life while dealing with the trauma of his early birth, and David was using her vulnerable state as cover for his affair. "That's probably for the best," Jessica said as they moved into the room. The last thing we need is her figuring things out before we're ready to make our move. Don't worry about Sarah, David replied, his voice growing fainter as they moved deeper into the suite. She's so grateful that I'm being supportive during the NICU situation that she's not questioning anything else. And with the hormones and sleep deprivation, even if she did suspect something, no one would believe her. Sarah pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear more of their conversation. What she heard next made her feel like she was going to vomit. I can't wait to tell people about our baby, Jessica was saying. When are you going to leave her? Soon, David replied. I want to wait until the baby is stable and out of the NICU. I don't want to look like the kind of man who abandons his wife during a medical crisis. It would be bad for my business reputation. But you are leaving her. Of course I am. Sarah and I haven't been happy for years. She gave up her career to be a housewife. And frankly, she's become boring. All she talks about is domestic stuff and baby things. You're exciting, ambitious, successful. You're the kind of woman I should have married in the first place. Sarah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the hotel carpet, her pregnant belly making it difficult to find a comfortable position. Hearing David describe their marriage as unhappy was devastating, but it was also confusing. If he was so dissatisfied with their life together, why had he pushed for a second baby? Why had he been so affectionate and attentive throughout her pregnancy? I have something for you, she heard David say, followed by the rustling of shopping bags. Oh my God, David, it's beautiful. Jessica's voice was filled with genuine delight. I love it. Sarah heard kissing sounds and murmured endearments. Then Jessica's voice again. Wait, I have something to show you too. There was a brief silence and then David's voice filled with awe. Is that what I think it is? The ultrasound from my appointment today? Jessica said proudly. Everything looks perfect. The due date is exactly what we calculated. Sarah's confusion deepened. How could Jessica be pregnant if she was wearing fake padding? And why would she need fake padding if she was actually pregnant? None of it made sense. I can't believe we're going to have twins, David said, his voice full of wonder. I know. When we found out it was twins, I couldn't believe how perfect everything worked out. Your son with Sarah will have siblings right away. They'll practically grow up as triplets. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Jessica was claiming to be pregnant with twins, but she was wearing fake pregnancy padding. Either Jessica was lying to David about being pregnant, or she was lying to the world about how far along she was. But why the elaborate deception? I brought something else for you to see, Jessica continued. I hope you don't mind, but I made copies of the ultrasound photos to show my sister. I'm just so excited that I want to share the news with everyone. Sarah heard papers rustling, then David's sharp intake of breath. Jessica, where did you get this? Get what? That's our baby's ultrasound from today. No, it's not. David's voice was tight with confusion. This is the ultrasound photo from Sarah's appointment yesterday. Look at the date stamp. Look at the identifying information. This is my son with Sarah, not our baby. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could practically hear Jessica's mind racing as she tried to come up with an explanation. Oh my God, Jessica finally said, her voice taking on a panicked quality. The technician must have mixed up the photos. I specifically asked for copies of our ultrasound, but she must have grabbed the wrong ones from the file. That's impossible, David said slowly. Sarah's ultrasound was done at a completely different clinic. How would your technician have access to her photos? Sarah heard footsteps pacing back and forth in the hotel room. When Jessica spoke again, her voice was different, harder and more calculating than Sarah had ever heard it before. Fine, Jessica said. You want the truth? I took Sarah's ultrasound photos from her purse when I visited her in the hospital. I wanted to see what our competition looked like. Our competition? What are you talking about? Your son with her versus our twins. I wanted to make sure our babies would be healthier, stronger, more beautiful. I needed to see what we were up against. David's voice was barely controlled. Jessica, that is insane. These aren't competing babies. This is my son with my wife. If you're really pregnant with my children, Then they're all siblings. If I'm really pregnant, Jessica's voice rose dangerously. Are you questioning whether I'm carrying your babies? I'm questioning why you're showing me ultrasound photos of Sarah's baby and claiming they're ours? I'm questioning why you needed to steal personal medical information from my wife's purse. And I'm questioning why you're wearing what looks like a fake pregnancy belly under your dress. Sarah heard a crash, as if something heavy had been thrown against the wall. You bastard, Jessica screamed. You want to see fake, I'll show you fake. Sarah heard rustling fabric and what sounded like Velcro being torn apart. Then David's shocked voice. What the hell is that? It's called a pregnancy belly. David, I ordered it online for $500. Pretty convincing. Right, I've been wearing it for 3 months. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. When David finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You're not pregnant. Congratulations. Genius. You figured it out. But you've been talking about our babies for months. You've been showing me ultrasound photos. You've been planning nurseries and talking about names. All fake. Every last bit of it. God, you are so gullible. David, I can't believe it was this easy to manipulate you. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from gasping out loud. Jessica had been faking a pregnancy to maintain her affair with David. But why? What was her endgame? I don't understand, David said, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, he sounded completely defeated. Why would you do this? What did you hope to accomplish? I wanted to see how far you would go for me, Jessica replied, her voice now coldly amused. I wanted to know if you would actually leave your wife and children for another woman. And you were willing to do it, weren't you? You were ready to abandon your pregnant wife and your premature baby for me and my fake twins. That's not... I love you, Jessica. I thought we had something real. We do have something real. We have $2 million in offshore accounts that you've been transferring to me over the past 6 months. We have insider information about your company's IPO that's going to make us both very wealthy. We have detailed financial records of all your assets that will be very useful when I decide what I want to take from you. Sarah could hear David's breathing becoming labored, like he was having a panic attack. You've been stealing from me. I've been accepting gifts from you, very generous gifts, and in return, I've been giving you the excitement and passion that your boring wife never could. It's been a fair trade. The money, that's our children's college fund. That's Sarah's inheritance from her grandmother. That's money I've been saving for 20 years. And now it's my money. What are you going to do about it? David, report me to the police. How would you explain why you gave your mistress access to your wife's inheritance? How would you explain the affair to your business partners and your clients? Sarah realized she was witnessing David's world collapse in real time. Jessica hadn't just been having an affair with him. She had been systematically defrauding him, using his infatuation with her to gain access to their family's assets. David was as much a victim as Sarah was, though his victimization was a consequence of his betrayal of their marriage. I trusted you, David said, his voice broken, and I used that trust to get what I wanted. Welcome to the real world. David, sometimes the people we love hurt us in ways we never saw coming. Sarah heard footsteps moving toward the door and realized that one of them was about to leave. She quickly but quietly unlocked her own door and slipped inside room 2849, her heart pounding from both exertion and adrenaline. Through the peephole, she watched Jessica emerge from David's room. The fake pregnancy belly was gone, and she looked like her normal, non-pregnant self again. She was carrying what appeared to be David's wallet and his laptop bag, along with her own purse. Thanks for a lovely afternoon, darling, Jessica called back into the room, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Same time next week, Sarah heard David's voice, muffled but audible. Jessica, please, we can work this out. I love you. No, you don't, Jessica replied. You love the idea of me. You love having a younger, more exciting woman tell you how wonderful you are. But you don't actually know me at all. If you did, you would have realized that I'm much smarter and much more ruthless than you gave me credit for. Jessica walked toward the elevator with a spring in her step, as if she had just concluded a successful business meeting rather than destroyed a man's life. She was whistling softly to herself, a tune that Sarah recognized as the song that had played at David and Sarah's wedding. After Jessica disappeared into the elevator, Sarah waited several more minutes before David emerged from room 2847. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. His perfect hair was disheveled, his tie was askew, and his face was pale with shock. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the closed elevator doors, before finally walking toward the stairwell instead of waiting for the next elevator. Sarah sat on the edge of the hotel room bed, trying to process everything she had witnessed. Her marriage was over. That much was clear. David had been willing to leave her for Jessica, believing that Jessica was pregnant with his children. But Jessica had been deceiving both of them, using David's midlife crisis and Sarah's pregnancy as opportunities to steal their money and destroy their family. The situation was so much more complicated than a simple affair. Jessica was a criminal who had targeted their family specifically, using her friendship with Sarah to get close to David and gain access to their finances. David was guilty of adultery and betrayal, but he was also a victim of fraud and manipulation. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from the NICU. "Mrs. Matthews, your son's oxygen levels have dropped and we need to discuss some treatment options. Can you and your husband return to the hospital as soon as possible?" The text brought Sarah crashing back to reality. While she had been playing spy games at the Ritz-Carlton, her premature son was fighting for his life in the NICU. Whatever was happening between David and Jessica, whatever financial crimes had been committed, her baby's health had to be the priority. Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave the hotel room. As she opened the door, she nearly collided with David, who was standing in the hallway looking lost and confused. "Sarah." His voice was filled with shock and confusion. "What are you doing here?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah realized that David had no idea how much she had overheard. No idea that she knew about Jessica's fake pregnancy and the stolen money. She had two choices: confront him with everything she had learned, or pretend ignorance and use her knowledge strategically. "I was meeting Rebecca for lunch downtown and I felt dizzy, so I got a hotel room to rest for a bit," Sarah lied smoothly. "What about you? I thought you were in meetings all afternoon." David's face went through several expressions as he tried to decide how much to tell her. "I was meeting with an investor, but it didn't go well. I needed some time to think before heading back to the hospital." "The hospital called," Sarah said, showing him the text message. "The baby's oxygen levels dropped. We need to get back there right away." David's face immediately shifted into protective father mode. "Let's go. I'll drive." As they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Sarah studied her husband's profile. He looked devastated, like a man whose entire world had just been turned upside down. In the span of one afternoon, he had learned that his mistress was a fraud and a thief, that his affair was based on lies, and that his family's financial security had been compromised. But Sarah also noticed that David hadn't volunteered the truth about why he was at the hotel. Even in his shock and devastation, he was still lying to her, still protecting secrets. That told her everything she needed to know about the state of their marriage and David's character. As they drove to the hospital in tense silence, Sarah made a decision. She was going to let David's affair with Jessica play out a little longer. She was going to gather more evidence, document the financial fraud, and prepare for the legal battle that was surely coming. David had betrayed their marriage, but Jessica had committed crimes against their entire family. Sarah was going to make sure that both of them faced consequences for their actions. But first, she was going to focus on her son's health and recovery. Whatever happened between her and David, whatever legal battles lay ahead, her children's well-being came first. She was going to be the mother that Emma and the baby needed, even if she couldn't be the wife that David deserved. As they pulled into the hospital parking garage, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister Rebecca's name. "I've been trying to reach you all afternoon," Rebecca said when Sarah answered. "I have some information about David's finances that you need to hear. Can you talk?" Sarah glanced at David, who was focused on finding a parking space. "Not right now," but I'll call you later tonight. Sarah, this is urgent. I had my investigator look into those transactions you told me about. Jessica Crane isn't just stealing from David. She's been running the same scam on at least 3 other married men in the city. And there's something else. Something about Jessica's medical history that you need to know. Sarah's blood ran cold. What about her medical history? She can't have children. Sarah, she had a hysterectomy 5 years ago for ovarian cancer. She's been faking pregnancies to manipulate married men into leaving their wives. David isn't her first victim, and you're not the first family she's destroyed. Sarah hung up the phone in shock as David parked the car. Jessica wasn't just a homewrecker or a gold digger. She was a serial predator who targeted pregnant women and their families, using fake pregnancies to manipulate vulnerable men and steal their assets. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, Sarah realized that the fight for her family and her future was just beginning. Jessica had made one crucial mistake in her elaborate con game. She had underestimated Sarah's intelligence, determination, and willingness to fight for her children. The affair was about to become something much bigger and much more dangerous, and Sarah was going to make sure that she was the one who came out victorious. The NICU at 3 a.m. was a surreal landscape of beeping monitors, soft lighting, and exhausted parents keeping vigil over their fragile babies. Sarah sat beside her son's incubator, her hand pressed against the warm plastic as she watched his tiny chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. The emergency surgery had been successful, but the next 48 hours would be critical. David was slumped in the uncomfortable reclining chair beside her, finally asleep after 36 hours of constant worry. In sleep, he looked younger and more vulnerable, his face free of the stress lines that had appeared since their son's premature birth. Sarah studied her husband's face and tried to reconcile the man she had loved for 15 years with the stranger who had been willing to abandon their family for Jessica's lies. Mrs. Matthews, Dr. Sarah Chen, their son's neonatologist, appeared beside them with a gentle smile. I have some good news. The surgery went perfectly, and his oxygen levels have stabilized. We're cautiously optimistic about his recovery. Sarah felt tears of relief stream down her face. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you so much. He's a fighter, just like his parents. Now, you need to take care of yourself too. When was the last time you had a proper meal or got some real sleep? Before Sarah could answer, David stirred awake, immediately alert and focused on the doctor. How is he? Is everything okay? Dr. Chen repeated the good news, and Sarah watched David's face crumble with relief and exhaustion. Whatever else was happening in their marriage, his love for their children was genuine and unwavering. I'll give you both some time with him, Dr. Chen said, but I want to see both parents getting some rest soon. He needs you healthy and strong. After the doctor left, David reached for Sarah's hand. I'm so sorry I wasn't here when the contractions started. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most. Sarah looked down at their interlaced fingers, remembering when holding hands with David had been the most natural thing in the world. Now it felt complicated and loaded with subtext. David, we need to talk about some things. About our marriage, about our future, about what's best for the children. David's grip on her hand tightened. I know things have been difficult between us lately. I know I've been distracted with work and not as present as I should be. But this situation with the baby has made me realize what really matters. Our family is everything to me. Sarah, you and Emma and our son are my whole world. His words sounded sincere, and the emotion in his voice seemed genuine. But Sarah couldn't forget what she had overheard at the hotel. David had been ready to leave their family for Jessica, believing that Jessica was carrying his twins. The only reason he was recommitting to their marriage was because Jessica had revealed her deception and theft. I appreciate that, Sarah said carefully, but I think we should consider couples counseling. There are clearly some issues we need to work through. Absolutely, David agreed immediately. I'll find the best therapist in the city. We'll do whatever it takes to strengthen our marriage. David's eagerness to agree to counseling made Sarah suspicious. In her experience, Cheating spouses often suggested therapy as a way to appear committed to the relationship while buying time to continue their affairs. Or worse, they used therapy sessions to manipulate their partners and make them seem like the unstable ones. I also think we need to be completely honest with each other about everything, Sarah continued. No secrets, no lies, complete transparency. David nodded eagerly. Of course, I want that too. I hate that there's been this distance between us. I want us to be a team again. Sarah decided to test his commitment to honesty. Good. Then maybe you can explain why there's a hotel key card in your jacket pocket from the Ritz-Carlton. David's face went completely white. For a moment, he looked like he might faint or vomit. Sarah watched him struggle to come up with an explanation, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. I can explain that, he finally managed, though his voice sounded strained and artificial. It's not what you think. What do I think, David? You think I'm having an affair. You think I'm cheating on you while our son is fighting for his life in the NICU. Sarah said nothing, just waited for his explanation. The truth is, I've been meeting with Jessica there to plan a surprise for you. I wanted to do something special for when the baby comes home from the hospital. Jessica has been helping me organize a celebration, a way to thank you for everything you've sacrificed for our family. The lie was so smooth and delivered with such apparent sincerity that Sarah almost believed him. If she hadn't witnessed the scene at the hotel herself, she might have been convinced by his explanation. What kind of surprise? Sarah asked. I can't tell you that, or it won't be a surprise anymore. But I promise you, Sarah, everything I've been doing has been for our family. There's nothing inappropriate happening between Jessica and me. Sarah nodded as if she believed him, though inside she was marveling at David's capacity for deception. Even knowing that Jessica had stolen their money and betrayed them both, he was continuing to lie to protect their secret. I'm glad to hear that, Sarah said. I was starting to worry that something was wrong between us. Nothing is wrong that we can't fix, David replied, leaning over to kiss her forehead. I love you, Sarah. I love our family. Whatever problems we've had, we're going to work through them together. As if summoned by their conversation about honesty and transparency, Jessica appeared in the doorway of the NICU family room. She was carrying a large gift basket and wearing an expression of concern that looked perfectly genuine. I hope I'm not intruding, Jessica said softly. I just wanted to check on you both and see how the baby's doing. Sarah watched David's reaction to Jessica's arrival. His face remained composed, but she noticed a slight tightening around his eyes and a barely perceptible stiffening of his posture. He was clearly uncomfortable seeing Jessica so soon after their confrontation at the hotel. That's so thoughtful of you, Sarah said, accepting the gift basket. He's doing much better. The surgery was successful. Oh, thank God, Jessica said, settling into the chair on Sarah's other side. I've been so worried. I know how much this baby means to both of you. Sarah noticed that Jessica was no longer wearing the fake pregnancy padding. Her figure looked normal, slim and elegant in her designer outfit. Sarah wondered if David had demanded that Jessica stop the pregnancy charade, or if Jessica had simply decided it was no longer necessary for her plans. Jessica, I was just telling Sarah about the surprise we've been planning, David said, his voice carefully neutral. Jessica's eyes sharpened slightly, though her expression remained pleasant. Oh, that. Yes, it's going to be wonderful. Sarah, you're going to love what David has planned for you. I can't wait, Sarah replied, playing along with their fiction. It's so sweet of both of you to go to so much trouble. The three of them sat in awkward silence for a few minutes, watching the baby sleep peacefully in his incubator. Sarah was acutely aware of the undercurrents of tension and deception swirling around them. David and Jessica were both lying to her, but they were also lying to each other. It was like watching a play where all the actors had different scripts. I should probably get going, Jessica said eventually. I have an early meeting tomorrow, but please keep me updated on his progress. If there's anything I can do to help, anything at all, just let me know. After Jessica left, David visibly relaxed. Sarah pretended not to notice, but she filed the observation away with all the other evidence she was collecting. "She's such a good friend," Sarah said, testing David's reaction. "Yes, she is," David replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "We're lucky to have her support during this difficult time." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into the role of devoted wife and new mother. She spent long hours at the NICU, learning to care for a premature baby and celebrating every small milestone in her son's recovery. She attended couples counseling sessions with David, where they discussed communication issues and work-life balance. To any outside observer, they looked like a couple working hard to strengthen their marriage during a crisis. But behind the scenes, Sarah was conducting her own investigation. She had hired a private investigator recommended by her sister Rebecca, and slowly but surely, she was building a comprehensive picture of Jessica's criminal activities and David's financial betrayals. What she learned was even worse than she had imagined. Jessica had indeed been running romance scams on multiple married men throughout the city. She would befriend their wives, gain access to their homes and personal information, and then seduce the husbands while pretending to be pregnant with their children. Once she had access to their finances, she would systematically drain their accounts before disappearing to target the next family. David was Jessica's biggest score yet. Over the past 8 months, he had transferred nearly $3 million to accounts controlled by Jessica. Money that was supposed to secure their children's college educations, fund their retirement, and provide a safety net for their family's future. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. Sarah's private investigator had uncovered records showing that David's tech company was preparing for an initial public offering that would be worth an estimated $500 million. As David's wife, Sarah should have been entitled to half of those assets in case of divorce, but David had filed paperwork removing her name from all stock options and ownership documents, effective 2 months ago, right around the time his affair with Jessica had intensified. Sarah realized that David hadn't just been planning to leave her for Jessica. He had been systematically stealing her share of their marital assets, ensuring that if their marriage ended, she would be left with nothing while he and Jessica rode off into the sunset with hundreds of millions of dollars. The betrayal was so complete and so calculating that Sarah could barely process it. This wasn't a midlife crisis or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to destroy her financially while abandoning her and their children. As Sarah sat in the NICU, watching her premature son fight for every breath, she made a decision. David and Jessica thought they had outmaneuvered her, thought they had successfully stolen her future and her children's inheritance. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated her intelligence, her determination, and her willingness to fight for justice. Sarah was going to take back everything they had stolen from her, and she was going to make sure they both faced consequences for their crimes. The war for her family's future was about to begin, and Sarah intended to win. But first, she had to pretend that everything was normal. She had to keep playing the role of the loving, trusting wife while she gathered evidence and prepared her counterattack. It was going to be the performance of her lifetime, and everything depended on her ability to fool the two people who thought they had already fooled her. The stakes couldn't be higher. Her children's future, her own survival, and justice for all of Jessica's victims depended on Sarah's ability to outmaneuver two people who had already proven themselves to be master manipulators. As Sarah looked down at her son's tiny fingers wrapped around her index finger, she whispered a promise to him. "Mommy's going to make sure you and Emma have everything you deserve. No matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, I'm going to make this right." The battle lines were drawn. Sarah just hoped she was strong enough to win a war against two people who had already shown they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Sarah's worst fears materialized on a gray Tuesday morning when a process server appeared at the NICU, handing her divorce papers while she sat beside her son's incubator. The documents painted a picture of Sarah as an unstable mother suffering from severe postpartum depression, a woman so mentally unfit that she posed a danger to her children's welfare. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm sorry to serve you here," the young man said quietly, clearly uncomfortable with delivering legal documents in a hospital. but the court requires that you be notified immediately. Sarah's hands shook as she read through the filing. David was requesting immediate temporary custody of both children, claiming that Sarah's erratic behavior, paranoid delusions, and emotional instability made her unfit for motherhood. He cited her stalking behavior at the Ritz-Carlton, her obsessive questioning about his work schedule, and her inability to care for herself during the postpartum period as evidence of her mental breakdown. The cruelest part was that David had turned her legitimate concerns about his affair into evidence of her insanity. Every question she had asked, every suspicious behavior she had noticed, every attempt to understand what was happening in her marriage had been documented by David as proof of her paranoid delusions. "Mom, what's wrong?" 13-year-old Emma appeared beside her, having just arrived from school. Sarah's heart broke as she looked at her daughter's concerned face. Emma was caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand, and Sarah knew that protecting her children was more important than protecting her own heart. "There are some legal issues Daddy and I need to work out," Sarah said carefully, folding the papers and putting them in her purse. "But don't worry about it, sweetheart. Adult problems." "Okay." Emma nodded, but Sarah could see the anxiety in her daughter's eyes. Children always knew when their parents' marriage was in trouble, even when the adults tried to hide it. 3 days later, Sarah sat in family court wearing her best conservative outfit, trying to look stable and competent while her world collapsed around her. David sat across the courtroom with his team of expensive lawyers, looking every inch the successful businessman and concerned father. Between them sat their premature son's future, hanging in the balance of a legal system that seemed designed to favor wealth over truth. David's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Hoffman, painted a devastating picture of Sarah's mental state. She presented evidence of Sarah's stalking behavior at the hotel, her paranoid accusations about David's fidelity, and her inability to maintain her personal appearance or household responsibilities during her pregnancy. "Your Honor," Hoffman said with practiced sincerity, "my client is deeply concerned about his wife's mental health and her ability to care for their vulnerable premature infant. Mrs. Matthews has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior, including following my client to hotels and making wild accusations about his business relationships." Sarah's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named Paul Rodriguez, who was clearly overwhelmed by the case, made a weak attempt to defend her. "Your Honor, Mrs. Matthews is simply a concerned wife and mother going through the stress of having a premature baby. Any parent would be anxious under these circumstances." But Hoffman was ready with her knockout punch. "Your Honor, we have testimony from a witness who observed Mrs. Matthews' behavior firsthand and can speak to her deteriorating mental state." Sarah's heart sank as Jessica walked into the courtroom, looking professional and concerned in a navy blue suit. Jessica had positioned herself as the worried family friend, the objective observer who only wanted what was best for the children. "Ms. Crane," Hoffman began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the Matthews family." "I've been Sarah's best friend for over 15 years, Jessica said, her voice carrying just the right note of sadness and concern. "I was her maid of honor at her wedding, and I'm Emma's godmother. I love this family like they're my own blood." Sarah watched in horror as Jessica spun a masterful web of lies, presenting herself as the caring friend who had noticed Sarah's mental decline with growing alarm. "I first became concerned about Sarah's mental state about 6 months ago," Jessica testified. "She started making strange accusations about David, claiming he was hiding things from her and being secretive about his work. She would call me at all hours, crying and saying she felt like David was planning to leave her." "Did you observe any other concerning behaviors?" Hoffman prompted. "Yes, Sarah became obsessed with checking David's phone and computer. She would follow him to business meetings and then confront him with wild theories about what he was really doing. It was clear that she was becoming increasingly paranoid and delusional." Sarah wanted to scream that Jessica was describing a woman who had good reason to be suspicious, a woman whose instincts about her husband's affair had been completely accurate. But in the sterile environment of the courtroom, her reasonable concerns had been reframed as symptoms of mental illness, In your opinion, Miss Crane, is Mrs. Matthews capable of caring for a premature infant who requires specialized medical attention? Jessica's face took on an expression of profound sadness. I love Sarah like a sister, but honestly, I'm worried about her ability to care for herself, let alone a vulnerable baby. She's lost weight. She's not sleeping. She's constantly anxious and emotional. I think she needs professional help before she can be trusted with the children's welfare. The most devastating part of Jessica's testimony was how reasonable it sounded. To anyone who didn't know the truth about the affair and the financial fraud, Sarah's behavior would indeed seem paranoid and concerning. Jessica had brilliantly turned Sarah's justified suspicions into evidence of mental instability. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she felt like she was walking into a trap with no way out. How could she explain her erratic behavior without revealing that she had discovered David's affair? How could she defend her actions without sounding like the paranoid, delusional woman they were painting her to be, Mrs. Matthews? Her own attorney asked, "Can you explain why you were at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel on the day in question?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would determine her children's future. I had been feeling unwell and dizzy, so I rented a room to rest before driving home. I'm 6 months pregnant, and my doctor had advised me to be careful about overexertion. It was a reasonable explanation, but Sarah could see the skepticism in the judge's eyes. Hoffman had already painted Sarah as untrustworthy, and now every answer she gave would be viewed through that lens. Mrs. Matthews, have you been experiencing any symptoms of depression, anxiety, or other mental health concerns during your pregnancy? Sarah knew this was a trap. If she said no, she would look like she was in denial. If she said yes, she would be confirming their argument that she was mentally unfit. I've experienced the normal stress and anxiety that any parent would feel during a high-risk pregnancy, Sarah answered carefully. Having a premature baby in the NICU is terrifying for any mother, but Hoffman was ready for her cross-examination. Mrs. Matthews, isn't it true that you've been accusing your husband of having an affair with no evidence whatsoever? I had concerns about some changes in his behavior, Sarah replied, trying to stay calm. Concerns or paranoid delusions? Isn't it true that you followed my client to a hotel because you believed he was meeting another woman there? Sarah felt trapped. If she denied it, she would be lying under oath. If she confirmed it, she would be validating their narrative of her mental instability. I was concerned about my husband's behavior, and I wanted to understand what was happening in our marriage. Sarah said finally, "So you admit to stalking behavior? You admit to following your husband and spying on him based on nothing more than your own paranoid suspicions?" Sarah's attorney objected, but the damage was done. To the judge, Sarah looked like a woman whose pregnancy hormones and postpartum stress had driven her to irrational, stalking behavior against her innocent husband. The most heartbreaking part of the hearing was when Emma was called to testify. Sarah watched her 13-year-old daughter walk to the witness stand, looking small and scared in the formal courtroom setting. "Emma," Hoffman said gently, "I know this is difficult, but we need to ask you some questions about your parents. Has your mother's behavior seemed different lately?" Emma glanced at Sarah, her eyes filled with confusion and loyalty. "Mom has been stressed about the baby being born early. Anyone would be stressed about that." "Of course. But has she seemed sad or worried about other things? Has she been crying more than usual or saying things that don't make sense?" Sarah could see Emma struggling with the question. Her daughter was trying to be loyal to her mother while also being honest about what she had observed. "Mom has been crying more, but that's because she's worried about my baby brother, and she did ask me some questions about Dad's work schedule and stuff, but I think she was just trying to understand why he was gone so much." Hoffman pressed further. "Emma, if you had to choose which parent you felt safer living with right now, who would you choose?" It was a cruel question to ask a child, and Sarah's attorney objected strenuously, but the damage was done. Emma's hesitation spoke volumes, and Sarah knew that her daughter was genuinely confused about what was happening in their family. "I want to live with both my parents," Emma said finally, her voice barely audible. But if you had to choose just one, which parent seems more stable and able to take care of you and the baby? Emma looked directly at Sarah, her eyes filled with tears. I love my mom, but she's been really sad and scared lately. Dad seems more, I don't know, more normal. Sarah felt her heart shatter as she listened to her own daughter inadvertently support David's case. Emma didn't understand that Sarah's sadness and fear were justified responses to discovering her husband's betrayal. To a 13-year-old, David's calm demeanor and controlled behavior looked like stability, while Sarah's emotional responses looked like instability. When the judge announced his decision, Sarah knew she had lost before he even spoke. Temporary custody of both children was awarded to David, based on his superior financial stability and Sarah's need for mental health treatment. Sarah was granted supervised visitation rights, contingent on her agreeing to undergo psychological evaluation and counseling. Mrs. Matthews, the judge said, not unkindly, I can see that you love your children very much, but the evidence suggests that you're struggling with some significant mental health challenges that need to be addressed before you can provide a safe, stable environment for a premature infant and a teenage daughter. As Sarah sat in the courthouse hallway afterward, trying to process what had just happened, she realized the full scope of David and Jessica's manipulation. They hadn't just stolen her money and betrayed her trust. They had systematically destroyed her credibility and painted her as an unfit mother, ensuring that even when the truth about their crimes eventually came out, Sarah would still lose her children. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall as Sarah walked to her car. She had no home to go to. David had changed the locks and claimed she was too unstable to be trusted with keys. She had no money. Their joint accounts had been frozen pending the divorce proceedings. She had no children. They were staying with their father, and his lawyers had made it clear that any attempt to contact them outside of supervised visits would be considered a violation of the court order. Sarah sat in her car in the courthouse parking lot, rain streaming down the windshells, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears she had been shedding for weeks, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the very core of her being. She had lost everything that mattered to her, and the people responsible were being celebrated as the stable, responsible adults in the situation. But as Sarah cried, she also began to plan. David and Jessica had won this battle by playing dirty, by using the legal system's biases against emotional women and in favor of wealthy, calm men. But Sarah was done playing fair. If they wanted to wage war using lies and manipulation, she was going to show them what a truly motivated woman could accomplish when she stopped trying to be nice and started fighting for her life. The war for her children and her future was just beginning, and Sarah Matthews was done being the victim. It was time to become the hunter. 3 weeks after losing custody of her children, Sarah sat in her sister Rebecca's guest room, surrounded by legal documents, financial records, and photographs that would expose the elaborate fraud that had destroyed her family. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but Sarah knew that presenting it effectively would require perfect timing and flawless execution. Rebecca knocked softly on the door before entering with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. As a divorce attorney, Rebecca had seen her share of ugly custody battles, but even she was shocked by the scope of David and Jessica's deception. The medical records came through, Rebecca said, handing Sarah a thick envelope. Jessica Crane had a complete hysterectomy 5 years ago due to ovarian cancer. She cannot conceive or carry children. Every pregnancy she's claimed in the past 3 years has been fabricated. Sarah opened the envelope and stared at the medical documentation that would finally vindicate her. Jessica's surgical records were detailed and conclusive. Not only was Jessica unable to have children, but her medical history showed a pattern of psychological treatment for what the doctors had termed pregnancy obsession disorder and delusional thinking related to fertility. There's more, Rebecca continued. The private investigator found records of Jessica using the same fake pregnancy scheme on at least 4 other married men in the past 5 years. She targets wealthy, successful men going through midlife crises, befriends their wives to gain access to personal information, then seduces the husbands while claiming to be pregnant with their children. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and rage as she absorbed this information. Jessica hadn't just destroyed Sarah's family on a whim. She was a serial predator who had perfected the art of targeting vulnerable marriages and exploiting both husband and wife for financial gain. "What about the money David transferred to her accounts?" Sarah asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Rebecca replied with a grim smile. Jessica made a crucial mistake. She got greedy. Instead of taking the money and disappearing like she did with her previous victims, she stayed around to milk David for more. That gave us time to trace the transfers and document the fraud. Rebecca spread out a series of bank statements and wire transfer records on the bed. David moved a total of $8 million to accounts controlled by Jessica over an 8-month period. But here's the key: Jessica convinced David that the money was being invested in cryptocurrency and offshore real estate on his behalf. She provided him with fake investment documents and forged contracts. Sarah studied the paperwork, amazed by the sophistication of Jessica's con game. So David thought he was moving money for investment purposes, not giving it away to his mistress. Exactly. Jessica positioned herself as David's financial advisor as well as his lover. She convinced him that she had insider knowledge about cryptocurrency investments and international real estate deals that would multiply their money tenfold. David thought he was securing his financial future, not being robbed blind. The implications were staggering. David was as much a victim of Jessica's fraud as Sarah was, though his victimization had come as a direct result of his decision to have an affair. Jessica had played them both, using David's midlife crisis and Sarah's pregnancy to create the perfect storm of vulnerability and opportunity. "We need to present this to the court immediately," Sarah said, gathering the documents. "This proves that Jessica committed fraud, that David was deceived, and that my suspicions about their relationship were completely justified." Rebecca held up a cautioning hand. "It's not that simple. Sarah, yes, this evidence will eventually exonerate you and expose Jessica's crimes, but presenting it now could backfire." "What do you mean? Think about it from the judge's perspective. We're asking him to believe that the woman who testified so convincingly about your mental instability is actually a master criminal who has been running elaborate cons on multiple families. We're asking him to believe that your paranoid delusions were actually accurate intuitions about a sophisticated fraud scheme." Sarah felt her hope deflating. "But we have proof. We have proof of the financial fraud. Yes, but we don't have proof that you knew about Jessica's crimes when you were exhibiting the behavior that led to the custody ruling. From the court's perspective, you could have discovered this information after the fact and are now using it to rationalize your previous erratic behavior." Sarah sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the complexity of the legal situation. Even with irrefutable evidence of Jessica's crimes, the custody ruling might stand because the judge would question whether Sarah's previous suspicions were based on knowledge or just lucky paranoia. "However," Rebecca continued with a strategic smile, "there is a way to use this information to our advantage. We need to force Jessica to reveal her deception publicly, in a way that makes it clear your previous concerns were based on real evidence, not mental instability." Over the next several days, Sarah and Rebecca crafted a careful plan to expose Jessica's fraud while simultaneously proving Sarah's competence and stability. The key was to make Jessica believe she was still in control while actually leading her into a trap. Sarah's first step was to request a meeting with David and Jessica, ostensibly to discuss their co-parenting arrangements and Sarah's recovery from her postpartum mental health issues. She knew that Jessica's arrogance and David's guilt would make them agree to the meeting, especially if Sarah presented herself as defeated in seeking reconciliation. The meeting took place at David's attorney's office, neutral territory that would make everyone feel safe while also providing witness testimony if needed. Sarah arrived looking composed and professional, having spent considerable time and money on her appearance to counteract the image of the unstable, disheveled woman from the custody hearing. "Sarah," David said as she entered the conference room, "you look good. Rested. I'm glad to see you're taking care of yourself." "Thank you," Sarah replied with what she hoped looked like genuine gratitude. "The therapy has been very helpful. I'm starting to understand how my anxiety and depression affected my judgment and behavior. Jessica, seated beside David, smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth. I'm so proud of you for getting the help you needed. Sarah, I know how hard it must have been to admit that you were struggling. Sarah marveled at Jessica's ability to maintain her caring friend persona even while committing felony fraud. It was a master class in psychological manipulation. I wanted to meet with both of you because I realize I owe you apologies, Sarah continued, following the script she and Rebecca had rehearsed. David, I'm sorry for the accusations I made about your fidelity. My therapist helped me understand that my fears about you having an affair were projections of my own insecurities about my changing body and my role in our family. David's relief was visible. Sarah, you don't need to apologize. I understand that pregnancy and stress can affect judgment. I'm just glad you're getting better. And Jessica, Sarah turned to her former best friend, I'm especially sorry for the paranoid thoughts I had about you. I actually convinced myself that you were involved in some kind of conspiracy with David to steal money from our family accounts. Can you imagine anything so ridiculous? Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before returning to full brightness. Oh, honey, pregnancy hormones can make us think the craziest things. I'm just glad you realize how silly those fears were. I do realize that now, Sarah said, watching Jessica carefully. Although I have to admit, I'm still a little confused about some things. Maybe you can help me understand what really happened during those months when I was being so paranoid. Of course, Jessica replied. I'll help any way I can. Well, I keep thinking about that day when I thought I saw you at the Ritz-Carlton. I was so convinced you were meeting David there, but obviously that was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Sarah watched Jessica's face closely as she navigated this conversational minefield. Jessica had to be careful not to confirm the hotel meetings while also maintaining her innocence. I think you might have seen someone who looked like me, Jessica said smoothly. You know how pregnancy can affect our vision and perception? Plus, you were under so much stress with the baby's health concerns. That must be it, Sarah agreed. And I suppose I imagine seeing you wearing a bracelet that looked exactly like the one David gave me for our anniversary, the one he said he lost. This time, Jessica's composure cracked slightly. She instinctively touched her wrist, where she was indeed wearing the stolen bracelet, before catching herself. I don't know anything about David's lost jewelry, Jessica said, her voice slightly strained. Sarah pressed on, knowing she was getting close to Jessica's breaking point. The strangest delusion I had was about you being pregnant. I actually convinced myself that you were faking a pregnancy to manipulate David. Can you imagine anything so bizarre? A fake pregnancy scheme? It sounds like something out of a movie. Jessica's laugh sounded forced and artificial. That does sound like something from a psychological thriller. Though I have to say, Sarah, I am actually pregnant, so your intuition wasn't completely wrong. Just misdirected. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. You're pregnant. That's wonderful news. How far along are you? About 4 months, Jessica replied, placing a protective hand over her flat stomach. 4 months, but Jessica, that's impossible. Jessica's face went pale. What do you mean? Sarah pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the conference table. I mean that according to your medical records, you had a complete hysterectomy 5 years ago due to ovarian cancer. You cannot conceive or carry children, so either you've experienced a medical miracle or you're lying about being pregnant. The silence in the room was deafening. David stared at Jessica with dawning horror, while Jessica's face cycled through confusion, anger, and finally, cold calculation. I don't know where you got those medical records, but they're fake, Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah pulled out additional documents. These are certified copies from Johns Hopkins Hospital, where your surgery was performed. They're authenticated and notarized. But if you'd like to prove me wrong, I'm sure you'd be happy to take a pregnancy test right now. David found his voice. Jessica, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you haven't been lying about being pregnant with my child. Jessica looked around the room like a trapped animal, realizing that her carefully constructed lies were crumbling around her. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different, harder and more calculating than Sarah had ever heard it. "Fine," Jessica said. "You want the truth I'm not pregnant? I've never been pregnant with David's child. The whole thing was a performance designed to keep him interested and invested in our relationship." David's face went white with shock and betrayal. "But the ultrasound photos, the doctor's appointments, you said we were having twins." "All fake," Jessica replied with cold satisfaction. "Ultrasound photos downloaded from the internet, fake medical documents, paid actors posing as doctors. It's amazing what you can accomplish with a little creativity and some startup capital." Sarah watched David's world collapse in real time. The man who had been willing to abandon his family for Jessica and their unborn children was learning that everything he had sacrificed his marriage for was based on lies. "The money," David whispered. "The $2.8 million I transferred to your investment accounts is gone," Jessica finished. "Move to offshore accounts where you'll never find it. Consider it payment for services rendered." David stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my family. You made me lose custody of my children. All for money." "All for a lot of money," Jessica corrected. "And it wasn't difficult. David, you were so eager to believe that a younger, more exciting woman found you irresistible that you never questioned any of it. Your midlife crisis made you the perfect mark." Sarah felt a strange mixture of vindication and pity as she watched David process Jessica's betrayal. He was finally understanding what Sarah had gone through, the devastating realization that someone you loved and trusted had been manipulating you all along. "Sarah," David turned to her with tears in his eyes, "I am so sorry. I thought you were losing your mind, but you were right about everything. Jessica was playing us both." Sarah nodded, but she wasn't ready to forgive David yet. "You were right that I was being paranoid and suspicious, David, but my paranoia was justified. My suspicions were based on real evidence that you chose to dismiss because it was easier to believe I was mentally unstable than to face the truth about your affair." The meeting ended with Jessica storming out, threatening lawsuits and claiming that Sarah had somehow fabricated the medical evidence. David sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the scope of the deception that had destroyed his family. But Sarah knew that exposing Jessica's fraud was only the first step in reclaiming her life. She still had to prove to the court that her previous behavior was rational rather than delusional, regain custody of her children, and rebuild her relationship with David if that was even possible. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was fighting from a position of strength rather than desperation. Jessica's lies had been exposed. David's betrayal had been revealed for what it was, and Sarah had proven that she was neither paranoid nor delusional. Now she had to figure out how to put her family back together from the ashes of Jessica's deception. Sarah stood in the foyer of what had been her family home for 8 years, watching federal agents catalog and seize everything she had spent decades building. Her wedding china was being photographed and tagged as potential evidence. Emma's piano, where she had practiced for countless recitals, was being evaluated for its monetary value. Even the family photos on the mantelpiece were being scrutinized for what the lead FBI agent called lifestyle evidence. "Mrs. Matthews, I need you to understand that everything in this house is considered potential proceeds of criminal activity until we can trace the money that paid for it," Special Agent Maria Rodriguez explained with professional sympathy. "I know this is difficult, but Jessica Crane's fraud operation was extensive, and we need to recover assets for all the victims." Sarah nodded numbly, still trying to process how quickly her vindication had turned into another catastrophe. Exposing Jessica's fake pregnancy scheme and financial fraud should have been her moment of triumph. Instead, it had triggered a federal investigation that treated Sarah and David as potential co-conspirators rather than victims. "Agent Rodriguez, my wife had nothing to do with Jessica's crimes," David said, his voice hoarse from stress and sleepless nights. "Sarah was trying to warn me about Jessica's deception, but I wouldn't listen." "Mr. Matthews, I understand your desire to protect your wife, but the financial transfers from your accounts to Ms. Crane's shell companies show a pattern of sophistication that suggests multiple people were involved in the planning. Sarah watched David's face crumble as he realized that his attempts to move money secretly with Jessica were now being interpreted as evidence of an elaborate conspiracy. The offshore accounts, the cryptocurrency investments, the complex web of shell companies that Jessica had created to hide the stolen funds, all of it looked like the work of a criminal organization rather than one woman's elaborate con game. Emma appeared in the doorway, her 13-year-old face pale with confusion and fear. Mom, why are these people taking our stuff? Did we do something wrong? Sarah's heart broke as she knelt down to her daughter's level. We didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. But there's a problem with some business deals that Daddy was involved in, and the government needs to investigate. Are we going to jail? Emma whispered, and Sarah could see the genuine terror in her daughter's eyes. No, baby. Nobody's going to jail. This is just something we have to get through as a family. But even as Sarah spoke the words, she wasn't sure they were true. The federal investigation had frozen all of their assets pending a determination of which money was legitimately earned and which might be proceeds of Jessica's fraud. David's company was under investigation for potential money laundering, since Jessica had used her position as VP of Marketing to facilitate the illegal transfers. The IPO that would have secured their children's financial future had been canceled indefinitely. Over the next several weeks, Sarah found herself living in a surreal world where she was simultaneously vindicated and destroyed. The medical evidence of Jessica's hysterectomy had been front-page news, proving that Sarah's suspicions about the fake pregnancy were completely accurate. The financial records showing Jessica's systematic theft from multiple families had generated widespread sympathy for Sarah as a victim of an elaborate con game. But the FBI investigation had also revealed the extent to which David had been moving money in secret, using Jessica's investment advice to hide assets from Sarah in preparation for their divorce. While David claimed he thought he was making legitimate investments, the prosecutors weren't convinced that a successful CEO could be deceived so completely without some level of willing participation. Sarah's vindication in the court of public opinion meant nothing when her family was facing potential federal charges, bankruptcy, and the complete destruction of everything they had built together. The good news is that Jessica has been arrested, Rebecca told Sarah as they sat in yet another attorney's office, this one specializing in federal criminal defense. She was trying to flee to a non-extradition country when the FBI caught up with her in the Cayman Islands. What about the money she stole? Sarah asked. Some of it has been recovered, but Jessica was smart about hiding assets. The FBI thinks they can recover maybe 40% of what she took from all her victims combined. For your family, that means getting back about $1 million of the $2.8 million that David transferred to her accounts. Sarah felt sick. Even if they recovered some of the money, they would still be facing financial ruin. The legal fees alone were approaching $300,000, and David's company was hemorrhaging clients who didn't want to be associated with a money laundering investigation. There's something else, Rebecca continued carefully. The prosecutors have offered David a plea deal. What kind of plea deal? They're willing to recommend a sentence of 2 years in federal prison in exchange for David's full cooperation in building the case against Jessica. No contest to charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering? Sarah stared at her sister in shock. 2 years in prison, but David was a victim of Jessica's fraud. The prosecutors don't see it that way. They believe David knew more about Jessica's scheme than he's admitting. The secret money transfers, the offshore accounts, the complex shell company structure. They think David was an active participant who's now trying to play the victim. Sarah realized with growing horror that David's attempts to hide their marital assets from her during their affair had made him look like Jessica's criminal partner rather than her victim. His secret financial maneuvering, done to ensure Sarah got nothing in their divorce, was now being interpreted as evidence of sophisticated criminal planning. What happens if David doesn't take the plea deal? He goes to trial facing up to 20 years in federal prison if convicted on all charges, And Sarah, Rebecca paused, looking uncomfortable. There's a possibility that you could be charged as well. How could I be charged with anything? The prosecutors think you might have known about David's secret financial moves and chosen to stay silent to protect your own interests. They're questioning whether your discovery of the affair was really as innocent as you claim. Sarah felt like she was living in a nightmare where every action she had taken to protect her family was being twisted into evidence of criminal intent. Her attempts to investigate David's suspicious behavior were being reframed as involvement in financial fraud. Her decision to gather evidence against Jessica was being questioned as possible consciousness of guilt. The legal system that was supposed to protect victims was treating Sarah like a criminal, while the real criminal, Jessica, was negotiating her own plea deal from federal custody. Over the following months, Sarah watched her life disintegrate in slow motion. David ultimately decided to take the plea deal, accepting 2 years in federal prison rather than risk a 20-year sentence at trial. Emma, traumatized by her father's imprisonment and the family's financial collapse, was struggling in school and had started seeing a therapist. The premature baby, now 6 months old and finally healthy enough to come home from the NICU, was thriving physically but would never know financial security. The college fund that was supposed to ensure his education had been seized by the federal government. The trust fund that would have given him opportunities and advantages had been dissolved to pay legal fees. Sarah found herself living in a small apartment with her 2 children, working at a customer service job that barely covered their basic expenses. The woman who had once been the wife of a millionaire CEO was now qualifying for food assistance and Medicaid. But perhaps the most devastating part of the whole ordeal was the way the public narrative had shifted. Initially, Sarah had been portrayed as the victim of an elaborate con game, the pregnant wife who had been betrayed by her husband and best friend. But as the federal investigation revealed the complexity of the financial fraud, media coverage began to question Sarah's innocence. Internet conspiracy theories suggested that Sarah had been in on the scheme from the beginning, that her discovery of the affair had been staged to provide cover when the fraud was eventually exposed. Social media comments accused her of being a master manipulator who had played the victim while helping to steal millions of dollars from innocent investors. The truth, that Sarah had been completely deceived by both David and Jessica, that her suspicions had been dismissed as mental illness, that she had fought desperately to expose Jessica's crimes, seemed less compelling than the narrative of a criminal family brought down by their own greed. Sarah's lowest point came when she was visiting David in federal prison, sitting across from her husband in the sterile visiting room while their premature son slept in her arms. "I'm sorry," David said for the 100th time. "I'm so sorry for everything I put you and the children through. Sorry doesn't fix this." "David," Sarah replied, her voice empty of emotion. "Sorry doesn't give Emma her college fund back. Sorry doesn't give our son the opportunities he should have had. Sorry doesn't undo 2 years of our children wondering why their father is in prison. When I get out, I'll spend the rest of my life making this right," David promised. "I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. I'll rebuild everything we lost." Sarah looked at her husband, this man she had loved for 15 years, who had been willing to abandon their family for Jessica's lies, and realized that their marriage was over. Not because of the affair, not because of the financial betrayal, but because the trust between them had been so completely shattered that it could never be repaired. "I want a divorce, David," she said quietly. "When you get out of prison, I want you to be a good father to our children, but I can't be your wife anymore." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I understand. I don't deserve another chance with you." As Sarah drove home from the prison, her baby sleeping peacefully in his car seat, she realized that hitting rock bottom had given her something unexpected clarity. For months, she had been focused on proving her innocence, on fighting the legal system, on trying to recover what had been stolen from her family. But maybe it was time to stop fighting the past and start building the future. Maybe it was time to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. Sarah had lost almost everything: her marriage, her home, her financial security, her reputation. But she still had her children, her intelligence, her education, and her determination. She had survived Jessica's deception, David's betrayal, and the federal investigation. She had kept her family together through the worst crisis of their lives. Maybe that was enough to build on. Maybe that was the foundation for whatever came next. As Sarah pulled into the parking lot of her small apartment complex, she made a decision. She was going to stop focusing on what Jessica and David had taken from her. Instead, she was going to focus on what she could create for herself and her children. The war for her family's future wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, Sarah was going to fight it on her own terms. 2 years later, Sarah was just beginning to rebuild her life when the call came that would once again turn her world upside down. She was at her small apartment, helping Emma with college application essays while their 4-year-old son played with building blocks on the living room floor, when her phone rang with news that would shatter the fragile peace she had worked so hard to achieve. "Mrs. Matthews, this is Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. I have some news about Jessica Crane." Sarah's blood went cold. Jessica had been serving a 15-year federal sentence for fraud and money laundering, safely locked away where she could never hurt Sarah's family again. "What news could there possibly be?" "She's dead," Agent Rodriguez continued. "Jessica Crane was found dead in her cell at the Federal Correctional Facility in Danbury 3 days ago. It appears to be suicide." Sarah sank onto her couch, her mind reeling. Suicide. She left a detailed confession, taking full responsibility for the fraud scheme and exonerating both you and your husband of any wrongdoing. The confession also reveals information about several other criminal enterprises she was involved in. Based on this new evidence, we're prepared to recommend that David's sentence be reduced and that all charges against you be formally dropped. Sarah should have felt relief, vindication, even joy that Jessica's death had finally cleared her family's name. Instead, she felt a strange emptiness, as if the woman who had destroyed her life didn't deserve the easy escape of suicide. "Mrs. Matthews, there's something else." Jessica's confession includes detailed information about the location of additional stolen funds. "We believe we can recover most of the money that was taken from your family and the other victims." After Agent Rodriguez hung up, Sarah sat in stunned silence. Jessica's death meant that David could be released from prison within months instead of serving his full sentence. It meant that Sarah's reputation would be restored, that the cloud of suspicion that had followed her family would finally be lifted. It meant that her children might actually have college funds again. But something about the timing felt wrong. Jessica had been in prison for 2 years. Why would she suddenly decide to confess everything and kill herself now? Sarah's private investigator, Jim Morrison, called her later that same day with information that made her blood run cold. "Sarah, I've been looking into Jessica's death, and something doesn't add up. The prison security footage shows someone entering Jessica's cell block around midnight on the night she died. The guards claim it was a routine maintenance check, but there's no work order on file for that night." "What are you saying, Jim?" "I'm saying that Jessica Crane didn't kill herself. Someone wanted her dead, and they wanted it to look like suicide. The question is who had the motive and the connections to arrange a murder inside a federal prison?" Sarah's mind immediately went to David. As part of his plea deal, David had provided extensive testimony about Jessica's criminal activities. He knew details about her operation that could potentially implicate other powerful people. If Jessica had been planning to expose those people in exchange for a reduced sentence, someone might have decided she was too dangerous to live. But there was another possibility that Sarah didn't want to consider. What if David himself had arranged Jessica's murder? What if he decided that killing his former mistress was the only way to ensure that his family could move forward without the constant threat of Jessica revealing more damaging information when David was released from prison 6 months later? Sarah watched him carefully for any signs of guilt or deception. He looked older, thinner, and more subdued than the confident CEO she had married 15 years earlier. Prison had broken something in him, leaving behind a man who seemed grateful for any kindness and desperate to rebuild his relationship with his children. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," David said during one of their carefully supervised visits. I know I destroyed our family and put our children through hell, but Sarah, I want to spend the rest of my life making amends. Sarah studied her ex-husband's face, looking for any hint that he was hiding something about Jessica's death. But all she saw was genuine remorse and a man who seemed haunted by his choices. David, can you honestly tell me that you had nothing to do with Jessica's death? What David looked genuinely shocked by the question. Sarah, I was in federal prison. How could I have had anything to do with Jessica's death? People in prison have connections on the outside. People who might be willing to arrange things for the right price. David's face went pale. You think I had Jessica murdered? You think I'm capable of having someone killed? I think you were capable of having an affair with my best friend and stealing our children's college funds. A year ago, I would have said you weren't capable of any of those things either. David nodded slowly, understanding that Sarah's trust in him had been permanently shattered. I give you my word. Sarah, I had nothing to do with Jessica's death. I wanted her to serve her full sentence and live with the consequences of what she did to all of us. Sarah wanted to believe him, but believing David had gotten her family into this mess in the first place, she decided to keep her suspicions to herself while she investigated further. Over the following months, as David worked to rebuild his relationship with Emma and their son, Sarah continued her own investigation into Jessica's death. What she discovered was far more disturbing than she had imagined. Jessica hadn't been planning to confess to additional crimes. She had been planning to expose a network of wealthy, powerful men who had been involved in her various fraud schemes over the years. Men who had paid Jessica for insider information, money laundering services, and other criminal activities. Men who had too much to lose if Jessica decided to cooperate with federal prosecutors. The suicide note that had cleared David and Sarah of wrongdoing hadn't been written by Jessica. It had been dictated to her by someone who wanted to tie up loose ends and eliminate any possibility of future prosecutions. Jessica Crane had been murdered to protect people far more powerful and dangerous than David Matthews. But the murder had been designed to look like it was motivated by David's desire for revenge and Sarah's need for vindication. Sarah realized that her family was still in danger. Whoever had killed Jessica might decide that David and Sarah knew too much about the broader criminal network. The confession that had seemed like their salvation might actually be their death warrant. But there was an even more terrifying possibility. What if David had been telling the truth about not arranging Jessica's murder, but was lying about not knowing who did what if David had made a deal with Jessica's killers, trading his silence about their identities in exchange for his early release and his family's financial recovery? Sarah's investigation led her deeper into a world of corruption and violence that she had never imagined. Wealthy businessmen, corrupt politicians, and organized crime figures who had used Jessica's services to hide money, manipulate markets, and eliminate competition. People who thought nothing of ordering a murder to protect their interests. The more Sarah learned, the more convinced she became that David knew more than he was admitting. His calm acceptance of Jessica's death, his lack of curiosity about the circumstances, his eagerness to move forward without asking questions, all of it suggested that he understood exactly what had happened and why. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. If she exposed what she had learned about Jessica's murder, she might be putting her own family in danger from the people who had ordered the killing. But if she stayed silent, she would be complicit in covering up a murder and potentially allowing other victims to be silenced. The decision was made for her when Emma came home from school one day with disturbing news. Mom, there was a man asking questions about our family at school today. He was talking to some of the other kids, asking about Dad and about what happened with the FBI investigation. Sarah's blood went cold. Someone was investigating her family, possibly looking for information that could be used against them. That night, Sarah called David and told him about the stranger at Emma's school. We need to talk, she said. There are things about Jessica's death that you need to know. I know. When David arrived at her apartment, Sarah presented him with everything she had learned about Jessica's murder and the criminal network that had ordered it. David, I think we're in danger. I think whoever killed Jessica might decide that we know too much to live. David's reaction surprised her. Instead of shock or fear, he looked resigned, as if he had been expecting this conversation. Sarah, there are some things I haven't told you about my time in prison, he said quietly. Things I couldn't tell you because I was trying to protect you and the children. What kind of things? I was approached by representatives of some very powerful people. People who had been using Jessica's services for years and were worried about what she might reveal if she decided to cooperate with prosecutors. Sarah felt her heart racing. What did they want from you? They wanted to know how much I knew about Jessica's other clients and activities. They wanted assurance that I wouldn't cause problems for them if I was released early. And what did you tell them? I told them the truth, that I was just Jessica's victim, not her partner, that I didn't know anything about her other criminal activities, that all I wanted was to serve my time and rebuild my relationship with my family. Sarah stared at David, realizing that he had been living with this threat for months without telling her. David, did you make some kind of deal with these people? Did you agree to stay quiet about Jessica's murder in exchange for our family's safety? David was quiet for a long moment before answering. Sarah, sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to make compromises you never thought you'd make. Sarah realized that David's silence about Jessica's death wasn't motivated by guilt or complicity. It was motivated by fear for their family's safety. He knew who had killed Jessica and why, but exposing the truth would put Emma and their son in danger from people who had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. What do we do now? Sarah asked. We do what we've been doing. We rebuild our lives. We take care of our children. And we don't ask questions about things that are better left alone. Sarah understood that David was asking her to become complicit in covering up Jessica's murder. He was asking her to choose her family's safety over justice for Jessica and potentially other victims. It was an impossible choice, but as Sarah looked at her sleeping son and thought about Emma's bright future, she realized that sometimes being a good mother meant making morally complicated decisions. Okay, she said finally. We don't talk about Jessica's death. We don't investigate it further. We focus on our family and let the dead stay buried. David nodded with visible relief. Thank you. Sarah, I know this isn't easy, but it's the only way to keep our children safe. As David prepared to leave, Sarah stopped him with one final question. David, do you ever regret that Jessica is dead? Do you ever wish things had ended differently? David considered the question carefully before answering. I regret that Emma and our son will grow up in a world where people like Jessica exist. I regret that there are powerful people who think they can solve their problems with murder. But do I regret that Jessica Crane can never hurt another family the way she hurt ours? No, Sarah, I don't regret that at all. After David left, Sarah sat alone in her quiet apartment, processing the moral complexity of their situation. Jessica had been a criminal who had destroyed multiple families, but she had also been a murder victim whose killers would never face justice. David was trying to protect their family, but he was also covering up a crime that might allow other criminals to escape consequences. Sarah realized that there were no clear heroes or villains in their story, just people making impossible choices in an impossible situation. She had wanted justice, but sometimes survival had to take priority over justice. As she checked on her sleeping children, Sarah made peace with the decisions she and David had made. They would rebuild their lives, protect their family, and try to create something good from the ashes of Jessica's destruction. The truth about Jessica's death would remain buried, another secret in a story that had already contained too many secrets. But Sarah also made herself a promise. If the people who had killed Jessica ever threatened her children directly, she would expose everything she knew, regardless of the consequences. Her family's safety came first, but there were lines she would not allow anyone to cross. The war for her family's future was finally over. Sarah had won, but victory had come at a price she never could have imagined paying. 5 years after Jessica's death, Sarah had built a new life from the ruins of her old one. She had published a best-selling memoir about surviving financial fraud and family betrayal, titled Shattered Trust: A Wife's Journey from Deception to Recovery. The book had resonated with thousands of women who had experienced similar betrayals, and Sarah had become a sought-after speaker on topics of financial abuse and recovery. Emma was now a freshman at Northwestern University, studying journalism and investigating the intersection of crime and family trauma for her own work. Their son, Michael, was a bright and curious 8-year-old who had no memory of the chaos that had surrounded his early years. Sarah and David had developed a cordial co-parenting relationship, though they had never reconciled as a couple. Sarah was just finishing a speaking engagement in Chicago when she received the phone call that would force her to confront the ghosts of her past one final time. "Is this Sarah Matthews?" The voice was female, young, nervous. "Yes, this is Sarah. Who is this?" "My name is Amanda Crane. Jessica Crane was my older sister." Sarah's blood turned cold. She found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby and pressed the phone closer to her ear. "I'm sorry for your loss, Amanda, but I'm not sure why you're calling me. Because I know my sister didn't kill herself, and I think you know it too." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 5 years of carefully maintained secrets pressing down on her. "Amanda, I think you're mistaken. The FBI investigation concluded." "The FBI investigation was a cover-up," Amanda interrupted. "I've spent the last 5 years investigating my sister's death, and I have evidence that proves she was murdered." "Wait, what kind of evidence?" "The kind that certain powerful people would pay a lot of money to keep buried. The kind that explains why a federal prisoner with no history of mental illness suddenly decided to confess to crimes she didn't commit and then conveniently die before she could change her mind." Sarah felt trapped. She had spent 5 years building a new life based on the fiction that Jessica's death was suicide. Her memoir, her speaking career, her children's sense of security, all of it depended on maintaining the official story. "Amanda, I understand you're grieving, but I have video footage of the people who visited the prison the night my sister died. I have financial records showing payments made to prison guards. I have recordings of phone calls where these people discuss eliminating the Jessica problem, and I have something else. Mrs. Matthews, something that directly involves your family." Sarah's heart was pounding. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the real reason my sister was killed. It wasn't just to protect some businessmen from fraud charges. Jessica had information about a murder that happened 10 years ago. A murder that your husband might have been involved in. That's impossible. David's first wife, Karen, the one who supposedly committed suicide after their divorce. Jessica had evidence that Karen was murdered, and she was planning to use that information to negotiate a better plea deal." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. David's first wife had died in what was ruled a suicide, but Sarah had never questioned it. Karen had struggled with depression after their divorce, and her death had seemed tragic but not suspicious. "You're lying," Sarah whispered. "Meet me tomorrow at Millennium Park, near the Bean, at 2 p.m. Come alone. I'll show you everything I have, and then you can decide whether I'm lying." After Amanda hung up, Sarah sat in her hotel room, staring out at the Chicago skyline and trying to process what she had just heard. If Amanda was telling the truth, then Jessica's murder was connected to an even older crime. And if David had been involved in his first wife's death, Sarah thought about the man she had co-parented with for the past 5 years. David had seemed genuinely remorseful about his affair and his role in their family's destruction. He had worked hard to rebuild his relationship with their children and had never shown any signs of violence or criminality beyond his financial betrayals. But then again, Sarah had thought she knew David completely during their 15-year marriage, and she had been wrong about almost everything. The next day, Sarah met Amanda Crane at Millennium Park. Jessica's younger sister was 28 years old, blonde like Jessica, but with harder edges and more suspicious eyes. She carried a thick manila folder and looked around nervously as if expecting to be followed. "Thank you for coming," Amanda said. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm here because I want to know the truth, but I need you to understand that I have children to protect. If what you're telling me puts them in danger, the danger comes from keeping secrets, not from exposing them." Amanda interrupted. The people who killed my sister are still out there, still covering up crimes, still eliminating anyone who threatens them. Amanda opened her folder and spread photos across the park bench between them. This is Karen Matthews, your husband's first wife. According to the police report, she jumped from her apartment balcony after taking a large quantity of sleeping pills. The investigation lasted exactly 48 hours before being closed as a suicide. Sarah studied the photos of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a sad smile. Karen looked fragile and vulnerable, not like someone who would have the strength to climb over a balcony railing in her condition. Amanda, even if Karen's death was suspicious, what does that have to do with Jessica? Jessica was blackmailing your husband about Karen's murder. She had evidence that David killed his first wife and made it look like suicide. That's how she was able to manipulate him so completely during their affair. Sarah felt sick. What kind of evidence? Amanda pulled out a digital recorder. This is a recording Jessica made during one of her hotel meetings with David. She was recording everything as insurance, in case David ever tried to turn on her. Amanda pressed play, and Sarah heard David's voice, clear and unmistakable. Jessica, you have to promise me that the Karen situation stays buried. If that ever comes out, it would destroy everything I've built with Sarah and the children. Don't worry, darling. Your secret is safe with me as long as you keep transferring money to my accounts. Karen's death will remain a suicide as long as you keep me happy. I never meant for it to happen. Karen was threatening to expose some business dealings that would have ruined me. We argued. She was drunk and emotional, and when I tried to stop her from calling the reporters, she fell. It was an accident. An accident that you covered up by staging a suicide. An accident that you've never told anyone about, including your current wife. Sarah stopped the recording, her hands shaking. This proves that David was being blackmailed, not that he committed murder. Keep listening, Amanda said grimly. The recording continued. Jessica, I need you to understand something. I've killed once to protect my family's future. I won't hesitate to do it again if you push me too far. Is that a threat? David. It's a promise. Karen learned what happens to people who try to destroy me. Don't make the same mistake. Sarah felt like she was going to vomit. The David in the recording sounded cold, calculating, completely different from the remorseful ex-husband she thought she knew. There's more, Amanda said, pulling out additional documents. Jessica had copies of the original police report from Karen's death, including witness statements that were never followed up on. Karen's neighbor heard arguing in her apartment the night she died. The medical examiner found defensive wounds on Karen's hands that were inconsistent with suicide, but the investigation was shut down after someone made calls to the police chief. Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about David, about their marriage, about Jessica's death, had been built on lies. David hadn't just been a cheating husband who got manipulated by a con artist. He had been a murderer who killed his first wife and then killed his mistress when she threatened to expose him. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. What do you want from me? I want justice for my sister and for Karen Matthews. I want the people who covered up these murders to face consequences. And I want to make sure that David doesn't kill anyone else to protect his secrets. You think David killed Jessica? I think David arranged Jessica's murder through contacts he made in prison. I think he convinced Jessica's other victims that she was planning to expose them, and they helped him eliminate the threat. But I also think David was the mastermind behind the whole thing. Sarah thought about the conversation she had had with David after Jessica's death, his calm acceptance of the situation, his lack of curiosity about the circumstances. At the time, she had attributed it to his desire to move forward and rebuild their family. Now she wondered if it had been the satisfaction of a man who had successfully eliminated a threat. What do you want me to do with this information? Sarah asked. I want you to help me expose the truth. You have credibility as Jessica's victim and a platform through your book and speaking engagements. If you came forward with this evidence, people would listen. Sarah thought about Emma, now thriving in college, and Michael, who was finally old enough to understand that his father had been in prison, but young enough to believe it was for financial crimes rather than murder. Exposing David's involvement in two murders would destroy their sense of security and potentially put them in danger from David himself. "I need time to think about this," Sarah said. "I understand, but Mrs. Matthews, you should know that I'm not the only person investigating these crimes. There are other journalists, other family members of David's victims. The truth is going to come out eventually. The question is whether you want to be part of exposing it or whether you want to be caught off guard when it happens." That night, Sarah called David and asked him to meet her at a coffee shop near his apartment. She needed to look him in the eye and ask him directly about Karen's death and Jessica's murder. David arrived looking relaxed and happy, clearly pleased that Sarah had reached out to him. Their co-parenting relationship had been improving steadily, and Sarah knew that David harbored hopes of eventually reconciling their marriage. "Sarah, you sounded upset on the phone. Is everything okay?" Sarah studied David's face, looking for any sign of the cold killer she had heard on Jessica's recording. But all she saw was the man she had married, the father of her children, someone who seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being. "David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What is it?" "Did you kill Karen?" David's face went completely white. For a moment, he looked like he might faint. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "How did you find out?" Sarah felt her heart break all over again. Even though she had heard the recording, part of her had hoped that Amanda was lying, that the evidence was fabricated, that David was still the man she thought she had married. "It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is that you lied to me for our entire marriage. You let me build my life with a murderer and never told me the truth." David looked around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening, then leaned across the table towards Sarah. "Sarah, you have to understand. Karen's death was an accident. She was drunk. She was threatening to destroy my business. She was out of control. When I tried to stop her from making those phone calls, she fell. I panicked and staged the suicide to protect myself." "And Jessica, did you kill her too?" David's expression hardened. "Jessica was going to destroy our family. She was going to expose Karen's death and implicate you as an accessory after the fact. She was going to claim that you knew about the murder and helped cover it up." "That's not true. I never knew anything about Karen." "But who would have believed you, Jessica, was planning to testify that you had helped plan Karen's death as part of a scheme to clear the way for our marriage? She was going to destroy you to save herself." Sarah realized that David was admitting to arranging Jessica's murder while simultaneously trying to justify it as protecting Sarah. The man she had loved for 15 years was a killer who had murdered two women and convinced himself that he was the victim. "David, you need to turn yourself in. You need to confess to what you've done and face the consequences." "I can't do that, Sarah. I won't do that to Emma and Michael. They've already been through enough trauma. I won't let them grow up knowing their father is a murderer. They're going to find out anyway. Amanda Crane has evidence. Other people are investigating. The truth is going to come out whether you confess or not." David's expression became cold and calculating, reminding Sarah of the voice on Jessica's recording. "Then I guess I'll have to make sure that Amanda Crane meets the same fate as her sister." Sarah felt terror wash over her as she realized that David was threatening to kill again. The man sitting across from her wasn't the husband she had loved or the father her children needed. He was a serial killer who would eliminate anyone who threatened his carefully constructed image. "David, if you hurt Amanda or anyone else, I will make sure that Emma and Michael know exactly what kind of man their father really is." "You won't do that, Sarah. You love our children too much to destroy their lives with the truth." Sarah realized that David was right. She was trapped by her love for her children, just as she had been trapped by her love for him during their marriage. David was counting on her maternal instincts to keep her silent while he continued killing people who threatened him. But as Sarah looked at David's cold, calculating expression, she made a decision that would change everything. "You're wrong. David, I love our children too much to let them grow up with a murderer who might someday turn his violence on them." Sarah stood up from the table and walked out of the coffee shop. leaving David sitting alone with his threats and his secrets. She had finally found the courage to choose justice over family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies. The war for her family's future was about to enter its final phase, and this time, Sarah was going to make sure that the right person won. 6 months after her confrontation with David at the coffee shop, Sarah found herself sitting in a federal courtroom, watching her ex-husband being sentenced for the murders of Karen Matthews and Jessica Crane. The evidence that Amanda Crane had collected, combined with Sarah's testimony about David's confessions and threats, had been overwhelming. David's conviction had sent shockwaves through their community in the business world. The successful CEO, who had once been seen as Jessica's victim, was revealed to be a calculating killer who had murdered 2 women to protect his reputation and financial interests. "Mr. Matthews," Judge Patricia Williams said from the bench, "you have been found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. The evidence presented in this case reveals a pattern of violence and manipulation that spans over a decade." Sarah watched David's face as the judge spoke. Gone was any pretense of remorse or victimhood. The man standing in shackles looked cold and defiant, angry that his carefully constructed lies had finally been exposed. "The prosecution has painted a picture of a man who believed he was above the law, who thought he could solve his problems through violence and cover-ups. Your first victim, Karen Matthews, was a vulnerable young woman struggling with depression after your divorce. Instead of helping her, you killed her and staged her suicide to protect your business interests." Sarah thought about Karen, the woman whose death had made her own marriage possible. She wondered what her life would have been like if she had known the truth about David from the beginning, if she had understood that her happiness was built on another woman's murder. Your second victim, Jessica Crane, was certainly a criminal who caused tremendous harm to multiple families. But she was also serving a federal sentence for her crimes, and she had the right to serve that sentence without being murdered by someone seeking revenge. The judge's words reminded Sarah of the moral complexity that had defined her entire ordeal. Jessica had been both a victim and a victimizer, both a criminal and a murder victim. There were no simple heroes or villains in this story, just people making choices that created ripple effects they never could have anticipated. "I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Karen Matthews, and life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Jessica Crane. Sentences to run consecutively. You will also serve an additional 20 years for the conspiracy and obstruction charges." As the judge pronounced the sentence, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. David would never hurt anyone again, but Emma and Michael had lost their father forever. The man who had once been the center of their family was now a convicted murderer who would die in prison. After the sentencing, Sarah met with Amanda Crane outside the courthouse. Jessica's sister had become an unlikely ally and friend during the investigation and trial. "Thank you," Amanda said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for having the courage to testify against him. I know it wasn't easy." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," Sarah admitted. "But I couldn't let him kill again. I couldn't let your sister's death go unavenged." "What will you tell your children?" Sarah had been dreading this question for months. Emma was now 20 years old and had followed the trial closely, understanding the full scope of her father's crimes. But 12-year-old Michael still believed that David was in prison for financial crimes, not murder. "I'll tell them the truth, age appropriately. Emma already knows most of it. Michael will learn more as he gets older and is able to process it. They deserve to know who their father really was, even if it's painful." Over the following months, Sarah worked with both children to help them process the devastating revelation about David's true nature. Emma struggled with guilt and anger, wondering if there were signs she should have noticed, questioning whether David's love for her had been genuine. Michael was confused and heartbroken, unable to understand how the father who had taught him to ride a bike and helped with homework could also be a killer. Family therapy became a regular part of their lives, as Sarah, Emma, and Michael worked together to understand their complex feelings about David and their family's history. It was painful, difficult work, but Sarah knew it was necessary for their healing. The hardest part, Emma told their therapist during one session, is not knowing what was real. Did Dad really love us? Or were we just part of his image? Were his good moments with us genuine? Or was he just playing a role? Sarah understood Emma's confusion because she felt it herself. The David who had been a loving father and devoted husband had also been a calculating killer. Both versions of him had been real, which made it impossible to dismiss their entire family history as a lie. I think your father did love you, Sarah told Emma. I think he was capable of genuine love and genuine evil at the same time. People are complicated, and we can care deeply about some people while being willing to hurt others. The revelation about David's crimes had also forced Sarah to re-examine her own story and her public persona. Her memoir and speaking engagements had portrayed her as the innocent victim of Jessica's fraud and David's betrayal. But the truth was more complicated than that. Sarah had to acknowledge that she had ignored warning signs about David's character, that she had chosen comfortable lies over difficult truths, that she had prioritized her family's stability over justice for David's victims. She hadn't been a passive victim. She had been an active participant in maintaining the systems that allowed David to escape consequences for his crimes. This recognition led Sarah to write a second book, titled Complicit: How Good People Enable Evil. The book examined the ways that families, communities, and institutions protect abusers and killers by refusing to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. It was a more difficult, less commercially appealing book than her first memoir, but Sarah felt it was more honest about the moral complexities of her experience. The book's publication led to a new chapter in Sarah's career as an advocate for victims' rights and criminal justice reform. She began working with organizations that helped families of both victims and perpetrators, recognizing that crime created trauma on all sides. Sarah also began a relationship with Dr. Michael Chen, the FBI forensic accountant who had worked on Jessica's fraud case. Michael was a kind, patient man who understood the complexities of financial crime and family trauma. He had been divorced himself and had 2 children from his previous marriage, so he understood the challenges of blended families and complicated histories. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than passion and excitement. After everything Sarah had been through with David, she valued stability and honesty over romance and chemistry. I need you to understand something, Sarah told Michael during one of their early conversations about their future together. My children and I come with a lot of baggage. Their father is a convicted murderer. Our family history is public knowledge. Dating me means accepting all of that. Sarah, Michael replied, I've spent my career investigating financial crimes and family fraud. I understand that people are complicated and that families can be both loving and destructive. Your past doesn't scare me. What matters to me is who you are now and who you want to become. 2 years after David's conviction, Sarah and Michael were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Emma served as Sarah's maid of honor, while Michael walked her down the aisle. It was a quiet, meaningful celebration that focused on the future rather than the past. As Sarah and Michael exchanged vows, she reflected on how much her understanding of love and marriage had changed. Her relationship with David had been built on passion, shared dreams, and comfortable assumptions about their future together. Her relationship with Michael was built on honesty, mutual support, and clear communication about their expectations and boundaries. I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is difficult, Sarah said in her vows. I promise to support your dreams while maintaining my own independence and identity. And I promise to face whatever challenges come our way as partners, not as people trying to protect each other from reality. Michael's vows were equally grounded in their shared understanding of life's complexities. I promise to love you and your children without trying to replace or erase your past. I promise to be a safe harbor in whatever storms we face. And I promise to build a future with you that honors both our histories and our hopes. The wedding reception was a celebration of resilience and second chances. Sarah looked around at the gathering of friends and family. Some old relationships that had survived her family's scandals. Some new relationships built during her recovery and advocacy work. Emma was laughing with Michael's teenage daughter, the two girls bonding over their shared experience of complicated family histories. Michael's son was teaching Sarah's son Michael to play guitar, creating new traditions for their blended family. Amanda Crane was also there, having become not just an ally but a true friend. She had started her own organization advocating for victims of financial fraud and had become a powerful voice for criminal justice reform. "I never thought I'd say this," Amanda told Sarah during the reception, "but I'm grateful for everything that happened. Not grateful that my sister died or that your family went through trauma, but grateful that the truth finally came out and that we were able to create something positive from such a terrible situation." Sarah understood what Amanda meant. The pain and trauma of the past decade had been devastating, but it had also led to growth, advocacy work, and a deeper understanding of justice and resilience. As the evening wound down, Sarah and Michael stood together on the deck of the venue, looking out at the city lights and talking about their hopes for the future. "Do you ever regret how everything happened?" Michael asked. "Do you ever wish you could go back and make different choices?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I regret that people died. I regret that my children had to go through trauma. I regret that I wasn't brave enough to face the truth about David sooner. But I don't regret where we ended up. This family, this life we're building together. It's built on honesty and choice rather than lies and assumptions." "What about David? Do you ever think about him?" "I think about the man I thought he was, and I mourn the loss of that illusion. But the real David, the killer, I don't waste energy thinking about him. He made his choices, and now he's facing the consequences. My job is to focus on the people I can help and protect, not the people who chose to cause harm." As they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Sarah received a text message from Emma. "Mom, I'm so proud of you for choosing happiness and honesty over fear and secrets. You taught me that we can create better futures even after terrible things happen. I love you." Reading Emma's message, Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with her career success or public recognition. She had raised a daughter who understood the difference between toxic love and healthy love, who had learned to value truth over comfort, who had the courage to build meaningful relationships despite experiencing betrayal and trauma. As Sarah and Michael drove away from the reception, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 10 years ago, she had been a naive housewife who believed that love and loyalty were enough to protect her family from harm. She had learned the hard way that love without honesty was dangerous, that loyalty without boundaries was destructive, that protecting people from truth often enabled them to cause more harm. But she had also learned that resilience was possible, that justice could eventually prevail, that new love could grow from the ashes of betrayal. She had learned that being a good mother sometimes meant making painful choices, that being a good person sometimes meant facing uncomfortable truths, that being a survivor meant taking responsibility for creating positive change. The war for her family's future was finally over, and Sarah had won, not by defeating her enemies, but by choosing to build something better than what had been destroyed. Her victory wasn't measured in money recovered or justice served, but in the healthy relationships she had built, the advocacy work she had accomplished, and the children she had raised to value truth and resilience. As they drove toward their new life together, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in over a decade: genuine peace. Not the fragile peace of willful ignorance or the temporary peace of crisis survival, but the deep peace that comes from living authentically and making choices based on wisdom rather than fear. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. Sarah Matthews Chen was ready for whatever came next, confident in her ability to face truth, protect what mattered, and create meaning from even the most difficult circumstances. Sarah was putting the finishing touches on her speech for the National Conference on Financial Fraud and Family Trauma when her phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made her blood run cold. Convicted murderer David Matthews found dead in federal prison. According to the report, David had been killed by another inmate during an altercation in the prison yard. The investigation was ongoing, But preliminary reports suggested that David had been targeted because of his crimes against women. Sarah sat down heavily, processing the news. David's death meant that Emma and Michael would never have to worry about him being released, never have to wonder if he might someday pose a threat to their safety. But it also meant they would never get closure, never have the opportunity to confront him about his crimes or understand his motivations. Michael found her sitting in their home office, staring at her phone with a complicated expression. "What is it?" he asked gently. "David is dead, killed in prison." Michael sat down beside her and took her hand. "How do you feel about that?" "Relief, I think, and sadness, and guilt for feeling relieved. It's complicated. Most things are." Sarah called Emma and Michael Jr. to tell them the news before they heard it from other sources. Both children had mixed reactions. Emma felt a sense of closure and relief, while Michael Jr. was confused and sad about losing his father permanently. That evening, as Sarah delivered her speech to the conference, she spoke about the complexity of justice and closure. She talked about the importance of creating systems that protect victims while also acknowledging the humanity of perpetrators. She discussed the challenges faced by families of both victims and criminals, and the need for support systems that recognize the complicated emotions involved in seeking justice. "Justice isn't always clean or satisfying," Sarah told the audience. "Sometimes the people who hurt us die before we get answers. Sometimes the consequences for their actions aren't proportional to the harm they caused. Sometimes we have to find peace without getting the closure we think we deserve." After the speech, Amanda Crane approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for that," Amanda said. "I've been angry about David's death because I wanted him to suffer longer for what he did to Jessica. But you're right. We have to find peace regardless of what happens to the people who hurt us." Sarah hugged Amanda, grateful for the friendship that had grown from such tragic circumstances. As Sarah and Michael flew home from the conference, Sarah reflected on the strange twists of fate that had shaped her life. 10 years ago, she had been a pregnant wife discovering her husband's affair through accidental photos on his phone. Now she was a nationally recognized advocate, a published author, a remarried woman with a blended family, and a survivor who had helped bring justice to multiple victims. David's death was the final chapter in a story that had consumed a decade of her life. With his death, the threat he had posed to her family was permanently eliminated, and the secrets he had kept could never be used to hurt anyone else. But Sarah also understood that his death didn't erase the impact of his crimes. Karen Matthews would still be dead. Jessica Crane would still be dead. The families they had left behind would still be dealing with the trauma of their losses. What mattered now was what Sarah and her family would build going forward. They had survived betrayal, fraud, murder, and years of legal battles. They had learned to choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, and healing over revenge. As their plane touched down, Sarah looked out the window at the city lights below and felt grateful for the life she had created from the ruins of her old one. She had learned that resilience wasn't about bouncing back to where you started. It was about using your experiences to create something better than what had been destroyed. The war was over. Sarah had won, and now, finally, she could focus on peace.